And we begin with our Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can I have a motion to accept tonight's agenda, please?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And we will move then to Dr. Harrison's superintendent report.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you. A few items to report on, since it's only really been a few school days since our last meeting.
Yep.
But I did want to touch base on the 8th grade class trip to Washington, D.C. As a number of people may have heard, that our 8th graders right before break headed down to D.C. on that annual excursion. And it was, to be honest, like no other experience I think we've had on a class trip before. It appears that several students were sickened by a virus, likely a neurovirus. On the trip, we had about 49 of the 131 students in attendance and 5 adults that experienced vomiting. Of these students, about 15 of them went to the hospital for treatment for dehydration or similar related needs. During the trip, I have to say, our principal, David Sotile, and all of our chaperones were simply amazing. The level of care and concern that they provided for our students was second to none. I have to give my accolades to the students as well. They were wonderful, supportive to one another and the adults during this really difficult time. Also want to thank Gail Krieger, who's in the audience, and Allison Daly, who are a tremendous support here from the home front. Our school physician, Dr. Huff, was outstanding. As soon as this situation surfaced, we were on the phone with her. She was providing us with guidance. She was talking to the ER docs in the hospitals, to each of them that were treating our kids. It was really a great support network to help us through a difficult situation. Also want to say that we had tremendous support from the tour company and the Westfields Marriott, where the kids were staying. The tour company went above and beyond, provided extra shuttles for us to move people about, so we weren't having to go back and forth in buses, went out of their way to make sure all the buses were sanitized. Hotel gave us extra rooms to move kids around. It was a difficult experience that everybody really made the best of it. I have to say it's really hard to be prepared for something like that because there's so many moving pieces, and you think about kids getting sick and adults then being sick that were there to care for the kids. However, I think we are quite proud of how the situation was managed. Since the return from break and the trip, we've had a debrief meeting where we kind of evaluated different aspects of the experience and all of our related protocols, and ultimately we're very pleased with how things went. We found a couple opportunities for some improvement that we're going to discuss broader with our administrative team. We've also been in contact with the Fairfax County Department of Health and the DC Department of Health, and filing the necessary reports with them. So if they want to look into if there was any additional root of the illness. But while it was a horrible situation, I want to thank everyone involved and thank the dozens of parents that really gave us the trust to care for their kids, and for really the countless appreciative emails and messages that we got while the kids were away, and certainly after they returned. Not a pleasant situation, felt terribly for all the kids and the staff involved, but really a tremendous sense of community. So.
Yeah, and from a board perspective, I want to thank you because my daughter was on that trip, one of the ones who got ill. Adriana was on that trip, and Bob Grados' son was on that trip. So we're pleased that they were well looked after, and it was clearly something that was unexpected, and then one could never anticipate something like that. But it seems like everybody pulled together as a team, and it was, in its own weird way, a learning experience.
Yeah, it certainly was quite a learning experience.
Can you just clarify, what was the virus?
It's believed that it was like a neurovirus initially.
What virus?
Like a neurovirus.
Noro virus?
Yes.
And do we have any idea how they?
It can come from anywhere. It can be something that's in water, it can be environmental, in a hotel room, in a bus. Initially there was some thought that it could have been like a random stomach virus. But when you look at we sat and literally looked at the pathways of the first person that got sick and then the interaction with other people, it didn't line up necessarily to how kids were grouped, how they were sitting on the bus. And in fact, the bus that had the fewest incidents of illness was on that particular child's bus. So it's really difficult for us to get to the bottom of it. They looked at, could have been food poisoning, but because of how it continued over a period of time, it didn't seem to be that way. But they said it could be environmental, and there's really no definitive way of determining it. It's, like when you think of those episodes that you hear on a cruise ship where you get hundreds of people that are sick, something that's a virus that was in the environment that impacted many people. I have to say that the kids that were sick, there were a few that went to the hospital, as I said, that were suffering from some dehydration, and some students that we brought just because they had other health concerns that we wanted to have them closely monitored. Students all responded well once they were given IVs. Some students were given anti-nausea meds, and the kids immediately responded. The vast majority of students felt better the next day. We think some of the kids, in fact, some of their illness may have been their concern and the emotion around seeing friends being sick, because a couple of those kids were asking if they could order a pizza and stuff a few hours later. And one student in particular, as soon as they got back on Thursday evening, the first thing he said to his mother was, "Can we get Chinese food for dinner?" But I certainly don't want to downplay the illness that the kids experienced. Even from the hospital suggesting that it was a virus, to our own doctor believing that it may have been a virus, to the communication that Mr. Sotile has had with the Fairfax County Department of Health, believe it was something that was viral.
But, right, it's viral, and is there some people, I've heard concern that it was around Irvington before they left. Is there any?
No, they said based upon how it spread and the number of kids that were impacted, they do not believe it was a child that had a particular stomach virus that passed it on to another. Because you couldn't have
picked it up here and there was incubation.
No, they believe that it was, and because it
Nobody
went
else
through
in
everybody so quickly to have.
Got sick.
It's not the belief, no.
No, and they didn't bring it back with them.
No, and we had that concern with, and discussed it with our own school physician, and it didn't seem that that's the case.
And where were they treated? Was it in DC or Fairfax? Or?
There was a local, at Children's National Hospital, which obviously is an outstanding facility. And then we had a couple children that were locally treated at the local hospital in, right near the hotel,
Fairfax?
Westfield. Yeah, in Fairfax.
Yeah. All right. Yep.
And 6th and 7th graders had a rumor that the Washington trip will be canceled going forward. I know that they've looked forward to it in the past. Does the district continue to have a commitment to running the trip in the future?
It just won't be as memorable as this year's. So, yeah, and I have to say, I did have outreach from one parent asking the question, who has younger children in the system, and Mr. Sotile, I know, had a single parent as well, and both of us responded that there was no such consideration. Just as I said, it'll be a little duller than this year, so.
Hopeful.
Yeah.
In terms of changes to the protocols that you're contemplating, is that something that you can report back to the board at a
Well,
future
nothing,
meeting?
we really organizational, in talking about an initial phase just from middle school conversation. We want to bring it back to our whole administrative team. But just when we think about logistics, we have mapped out which kids are in which rooms. Well, let's have blank room maps with us. And have those documents not only in hard copies, but also within like Google Docs, because they were taking written notes and duplicating them on personal devices, so we had multiple copies of everything, but it would have been easier to have some templated information. And then as a communication tool, people were using, they had a group text message for different groups, the leadership group and then all of the chaperones. And the one breakdown that we noticed in that is that if you didn't have that person's number in your contact, you just had a number showing up and you weren't sure who you're speaking with.
Right.
So we're looking at some other communication tools as well.
And I think the other thing, as I may have mentioned, is the idea that parent should have the chaperone's mobile number.
Yeah, so there's, the challenge with that is that they're all people's personal phone numbers, and a lot of them gave it out, but that a point of communication is something that we could look to set up in the time of a crisis.
I think that's the main thing, yeah.
It's the support in that, because we certainly can't have, 100 parents filtering phone calls down to a single person, because that would only add to another layer of frustration, but it's something for us to look into as well.
All right.
Another item to touch base on is that today we kicked off the first day of 3-8 testing, the state assessments with ELA. Tests went well in all of our schools, as parents with children in grades 3 through 8 may be aware from either our communications or having learned through the press that there were some modifications to the testing, fewer test questions, and there was some open-endedness to the time periods. We did have some children that took advantage of the extended time. We also had an increase in the number of opt-outs that we experienced. Last year, we saw about 7% of students opt out district-wide in grades 3 through 8. This year, that number doubled to about 14%, with a higher number in the middle school grades. In connecting with a lot of the other area superintendents, their Ardsley seemed to be very similar to ours, but a lot of the other districts in the lower Hudson Valley saw much higher test refusal numbers than we experienced locally. Dr. Corr, you have a couple things?
Sure, and I'll just add to that. One of the things that I heard, it's anecdotal, a lot less stress. Kids felt like the not having the time restraint really made a difference. They just didn't feel the same level of pressure. I would say we definitely heard that from Main Street School and the middle school. Dow's Lane, it's hard to say 3rd grade. It's the first time they're taking the test, so that's like a very different experience. Principal Joyce Chapnick, she really said the whole tone in the building was very different than prior. And just in general, people felt that kids just didn't feel the same pressure. And kids did take advantage of the time. We had many kids, not just 1 or 2 kids, who really felt that they were moving slowly, but not with the stress. So I don't know if that's what that says about the test. It's certainly not in support, but I think it's nice to hear that if that change made a difference and kids felt less stressed, then that's a good thing. Just 2 points of reference. Thursday night is our PLTW community night, so we're hoping that everyone who's sitting in here will be there too. You can still sign up if you go to any of the schools' home pages. There should be a link to sign up. You can, Project Lead the Way. So it's our STEM-based curriculum that we're implementing in grades 3, 4, 7, and at the high school level. And there, if you go back to any of the principal's blasts from the past weeks, there's been a flyer. So we hope we're going to have lots of people. Right now, I think we have about 70 people who have RSVP'd that they're going to be coming, and there'll be a brief presentation at each of the levels by the teachers. So we're excited. It's going to be it should be a great event. We're excited to share our work. And then on Friday, those same teachers, as well as our coordinator of technology, Jesse Lubinsky, along with me, will be presenting at a regional conference for our colleagues, also Project Lead the Way and the work that we're doing in Irvington. So, should be good.
Yeah, thank you. And since there's some different faces in the audience, want to give accolades to Dr. Corr and the whole Project Lead the Way team, because it really seems that we're leading the way in STEM education in the region, and I've already hosted one forum where all the curriculum leaders from the area came and visited Dow's Lane and participated in a wonderful program that they prepared, and there'll be another follow-up visit down the road. So we're receiving a lot of positive attention for the work, but most importantly, it's the experiences that we're delivering to our students. Bev, I would ask you to give an update on Safe Routes and the good work that's been going on. Bev has been chairing the Safe Routes to School Committee for the school district, which initially provided for some improvements in the community with additional sidewalks and extending sidewalks. But now there's a local effort in the school, and you have some great partners that you're working with on the committee, and Maura's here, and you want maybe you introduce her, say a few words?
Absolutely. Through the Safe Routes Committee, The main project we're working on right now in conjunction with the PTSA and with Maura Gadid as our coordinator is the walking school bus project. And I'm going to ask Maura to come up and just give a brief couple-minute overview on the walking school bus.
Sure. You can just come up to the mic right here if you don't mind.
Well, hello to everyone who I know and who I haven't met yet. My name is Maura Geddes, and I have a couple of kids, one in first grade at Dow's Lane and one entering kindergarten next fall. I took this on, I think, in February, Beth, would that be about right? And you could look at this as our lead-in year, in a way, because of the amount of organization that has to be done to get a district-wide walking school bus program up and running. The main issues, I guess, are getting the parents trained and the kids wanting to do it. The parent training is about making sure everyone's on the same page, making sure that everyone has the same expectations for safety for the walkers. And I had a very real confrontation with that today when I spoke with some of them, well, I spoke with all of the Main Street kids that I could reach out to today in a series of presentations. And a lot of them looked at me and said, you know, my mom won't let me do that. I go on the bus, that's where it's safe. And that's exactly why it's a multi-year program, because there are gonna have to be levels of experience that parents have with volunteering and walking with other people's kids, and other families are going to have to hear about what we have tried to put into place to make this a safe program in order for it to continue to build and for people to feel like walking in a chaperoned manner for K through 3, and if they're interested, 4 and 5 is a viable option for their family. So right now we're starting with, for the next 10 Thursday mornings, we'll be walking to school from a number of routes on Dow's Lane, and we'll see about Main Street. Obviously there's a lot of kids there that already walk, but if we do get some interest, then we're going to set those up as well. I haven't presented about this outside of my little committee, so if there's anything that you think I should talk about,
Okay.
that, please just let me know.
I just want to say, Maura's been doing a yeoman's job of coordinating this, and she is gathering parent volunteers. The parents will all be wearing vests to designate that they are the drivers on the school bus, and they will be chaperoned, and we're also working in conjunction with the police department so that if we have a very active school bus, meaning a lengthy number of children, that they will be working to ensure safe crossings through all the streets, and they are working closely with Maura on that. So we're really looking forward to this project.
When does it start?
It starts next Thursday. April 14th is the kickoff. Feel free, if you have kids in Main Street or Dow's Lane, to bring them and walk with us.
And what are there multiple routes, or is it a single route?
There will be basically anywhere that parents want to get together and create a route, as long as it is safe and as long as we can join into a route that we have, we are going to try and support that. But again, it's the balance of making sure that we're maintaining safety in the groups that we have. We have to maintain an appropriate ratio of parents per student, depending on the ages of the students. Those youngest are 1 to 3. At about 7, it gets to be 1 to 6. So things like that are what we're going to be making sure that the parents are clear on. But the routes can and have to be flexible, because this is going to be a volunteer-supported program. So we're trying to balance that right now, and that, I think, might be the toughest part, is
And you're going to
trying
make
give.
it fun for the kids to do these walks. They're going to
Yes.
have fun.
They will also have fun, and we have, we're certainly looking at all the different prizes and incentives that we can give them, as well as making sure that parents are grounded in teaching kids a life skill, but also can enjoy themselves. So,
Thank you.
thanks so much for listening.
I just want to say that I'm very excited that it's happening, and that I know for myself with my children that we were able to walk on the aqueduct together, and that was an amazing experience, very great time for conversation and imagination, and coming to school prepared. So I think it's a great opportunity. And maybe over time, we might learn about, either through the village or the school, some infrastructure improvements we can do to make it even better in terms of that walk.
I'm with you, Michael, and what's more, I think that any parents that participate are going to be very vocal about what they see that can be improved. And part of what we're going to do on every walk is ask parents to, number one, give us feedback on how the walk went. If there are behavioral issues, we have to deal with that right away. There's no, I have to right now be very serious about this rather than talk about the fun, because I really want it to go well, and I want the kids to be safe. However, we've also got more eyes on the road to look at where the interactions with pedestrians and the streets and the drivers are. And I think the more people there are on the roads doing that, the more feedback that we get for the town, and the more involved walkers we have, which is really good. So that's my hope.
Thank you.
Sounds like we're in good hands. Thank you, Maura.
Thank you, Maura, for all the great work. And certainly, like we said, there's been a team effort with the committee and principals and some teachers on the committee and other parents. The police department, Eric Oley has also been deeply involved in the work, so thanks to Eric. And Eric, I think, also for recruiting Maura to join us there, too. So thank you.
That's it.
And there'll be some signage going up around town, right? And then in the schools to promote it as well.
Great.
So
That completes your
that
segment?
completes it.
Okay, I'm sure we'll hear from you again in a few minutes.
I'm sure.
So we segue now to hearing from members of the community who have any comments on anything on the agenda tonight. There will be an opportunity, obviously, to comment after the budget discussion, and I suppose that we will also entertain questions after the special education cost analysis, but for sure after the budget discussion. Any comments from anybody? Okay. So we can move on to our presentations. Our first presentation tonight is the World Language Opportunity presentation, and I would imagine that's Dr. Kaur.
So just a couple words to introduce it. We've had conversation in this room a number of times, and I know there's been interest about looking at, what exactly could different world language models look like if we were interested in expanding world language-related studies further into the lower grades. So Dr. Kaur has prepared a pretty clear and concise overview, and so with no further ado, Raina.
Sure. So it's hopefully laid out in a way that's just simple and clear. Basically, the first page describes the 4 basic kinds of programs that schools consider when they're implementing world language at the elementary level. And then the second page gives you, it just breaks out the examples, it breaks down the minutes, and it just was trying to illustrate what it actually looks like to try and schedule this. I'm going to say, for the most part, the piece that most people would be interested in is really the cover page and the 4 different models. Thanks, Elaine. So just to go back for a second. So
You want me to scroll?
oh, because it's on a slide. Did you just do it, though, or no?
You were able to go from page to page.
Oh,
Not.
all right, it's okay. Do people have this?
Yes.
We don't need that. Okay. So again, the second page is just, it illustrates the actual minutes, and it gives you, for most of you who probably have never scheduled an elementary school, it tried to give you a little bit of information so that you could see the way that an elementary school is scheduled. So the 4 different programs that I provided you an overview with, as you can see, Immersion, Flex, and Exploratory. The immersion program is the most complex to implement. As you can see from the worth noting, this would require hiring dual language teachers we would have to access enough teachers so that half of our teachers spoke the alternate language. So what some school districts do, White Plains does this, Bedford, they do either a full day or a half day model. So one day I go into and I learn all of my content through the English speaking classroom, and then the next day I go in and I learn all my content through Spanish. Some school districts do a half day English, half day, I'm using Spanish as the example, half day Spanish. So an immersion program is very, very complex to implement, and would seem like it would require a lot of moving parts to actually make happen.
It's also not common beyond Spanish, right?
It's not very common.
Because NISBA actually put something together, maybe it was in the BOCES data, there's something that they released last year, the year before, showing all the different schools that
Yeah.
are doing for elementary world language, and it really looked like it was only Spanish.
Yeah.
And I think maybe one school was doing French, like Chappaqua or something like that.
Well, there's the city is doing this dual language thing that they're expanding that they've had in the news. I think that's other language. I don't know if that's the same sort of thing or if it's different, but they've had, I think they're doing some other language, maybe Chinese.
So the next two programs that, or approaches, the first one being FLES. So as you look across, what I tried to provide for you was the time allocation, and then as well as the personnel that would be required. One of the things that I think, especially if we look in our area at schools who have implemented these kinds of programs, many of them have then taken them away. They're expensive to maintain. So when you look across, what I wanted to show you was the cost and the number of teachers that we would have to hire in order to provide this kind of program. The last column also is some sort of representation of what it means to implement a program like this as far as instruction, and where does that language instruction happen. And obviously, we would need to not do something in order to provide this. So I also tried to give you a window into how many minutes it would require of classroom instruction time to implement this model. So as you can see, as you go down the page, it's fewer personnel. So the FLES program is more intense, and therefore it would require 4 staff members. The FLEX program, as you can see, is 20 minutes every other day, and therefore it's the reduction in staffing down to 2.5. One of the complications with any program like this is it's not a straight correlation. It's not, here's the number of minutes that we're going to teach, and this is the number of minutes a teacher has to teach. Scheduling, limitations of scheduling, times during the day where you can't schedule. When I say that, for instance, Dow's Lane. At Dow's Lane, the day starts at 8 o'clock for students. The first special of the day, though, isn't until 8:35 for the most part. Kids come in. They need to get settled. In the winter, they have lots of clothing that needs to be taken off and put away. At the end of the day, there's pack-up time. There's closure for the day. So even though if you go through and you calculate the minutes, you might say, well, this doesn't really make sense, because if I add up these minutes, it actually would give me this, and we wouldn't need 4. What I'm trying to accommodate for is the life of an elementary school is not minute. It's actually, you do something, it takes time. It takes time for students to get from one location to another location. So what I tried to give you was the best approximation for what that would look like. But you won't see a direct correlation for the minutes.
I'm looking at the last two, the personnel for flex and exploratory, and the number of minutes per week is really close. Why is the,
This exploratory would just be for the 5th grade.
oh.
So I'm going to get to that. Okay. So,
And just to put this in context, the others would be for which grades?
cost, it says it, if you look at the cost column, it says cost based on 6 sections per grade. Oh, let me be clear, I'm sorry, for all grades. For the other programs, I calculated K through 5.
Okay. Except for the last row.
Except for the last one.
Okay.
So that's the FLES program, and then you would reduce it down to what's called a FLEX program. The last item on here is an exploratory. And an exploratory program, I included here for 2 reasons only with 5th grade. This would mimic, to a certain degree, a program that we previously had where we brought world language to 5th grade. You also generally wouldn't do an exploratory program at the early grades. So maybe we could expand this if we wanted to go to .8, maybe to 4th grade. But generally, this is really an introduction to different languages. Not that you couldn't do it at the lower grades, but it would be far less effective at the earlier grades. So what this would be is a similar model to what we've had in the past, where our 5th graders would have an introduction to language, which would be that 45 minutes per week, which is like a special period. And this would align with, well, I don't want to say what the program would be. It could be a lot of different things. But what we're showing you here is that it would require only an increase of .4, and that would address the increase of a current part-time staff member as well. So that's why you see that one is just addressing the 5th grade.
So for that, the introduction to language, would that be similar to how it's run in the past with some French, some Spanish, or is it different?
I mean,
than
I'm
that?
cautious because we haven't, if this was something that we wanted to do, I would rather go back and work with Joyce and actually come up and share with you what a plan recommendation would be for 5th grade. I can tell you from our conversations already, probably not. Something more global, something that would look at more languages. In the past, our program was perceived as I don't want to say perceived, was a seed program. So in other words, we did a half year of French and a half year of Spanish, which prepared students to make the decision in middle school for 6th grade, am I going to do Spanish or French? At this point, based on our preliminary conversations, we were hoping it would be more global, possibly some Chinese, some Russian, some really an exposure to language through the lens for any parents here at Main Street School. I think you know that there's a very strong focus and initiative around global education, really exposing students. So I think it would be more aligned with the philosophy of the school and their global program rather than a seed program for Spanish and French.
So it really would be pretty separate from our language program.
It would be.
It wouldn't really feed into it in any
No.
meaningful way.
I mean, that isn't what we would recommend, I guess is what I would say.
That's also the reason that we excised this when budget cuts in the past, right? Because it was tied to language, but then not really. And so, the question was, what did the kids really get out of it other than something broad that really wasn't necessarily followed through on the language program?
And maybe just for parents or community members who may or may not know this, the way that the middle school works is we technically teach the first year of Spanish over the course of 3 years. So our students start taking language every other day in 6th grade, and then they take it every day in 7th and 8th grade. At the end of 8th grade, they have, in essence, completed Spanish 1 or French 1. So that seed of 5th grade wasn't really necessary. I'm not saying that it wasn't a great program in many ways, but we didn't see that it advanced our students, that they ultimately left 8th grade with more as a result of 5th grade. So this is definitely a different approach.
In order to achieve some level of learning of the language, it seems like we would have to consider FLES. And I guess, because even Flex doesn't get you there, reading some of the documentation in the back.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, as I've done this, and I've been on the World Language Committee many times over these last 15 years, so this wasn't a new topic, but I will say the consultant that we're working with our 612 World Language Program, who is, he is all over the world, and he is very, very well known. I vetted this with him as well, like to see, so what do you think? And I think he's very realistic that immersion programs are very difficult to implement. He did say, if anything, FLES would be the closest if you wanted to walk away. But even with that, it's complicated, not impossible, but complicated.
And I suppose besides the cost of hiring 4 additional teachers, the other major issue is obviously the time in the day.
Yeah.
Right.
But why, if you don't add time in the day, why do you add teachers? Because the teachers who were teaching those periods, do the teachers push in to a classroom where it's already the regular teacher, so you're basically doubling up for that time?
That's exactly what
That's
happens.
what's going on,
Yes.
otherwise, yeah.
Right, so the classroom teacher is there, but they're not, and they may be helping, or maybe learning the language right alongside the kids,
Partially
but,
at the same time, or
yeah,
whatever it is.
but, right, but that is why, because they're not equipped or certified to
Right,
teach.
but, well, the other approach would be to have them go, don't they have some time, when they're at the special, they're not teaching their class, right?
That's the prep
They
period.
have prep periods, is there any scope for using their prep periods for this, in a way? I don't know if that would work scheduling-wise, so.
They would have to have, we have other requirements, so we have to provide physical education, or,
So we still,
right, so we still couldn't,
we wouldn't want to get rid of any of those anyway, I mean,
We
even if weren't
can't.
required, but.
yeah, so we're not allowed to, but that's why the exploratory program, John, that is what the exploratory did. It took the 45-minute special period, which it could still do, so that it was the student's special that day,
Just once a week,
once a week.
right.
And just out of curiosity, how do other schools do the immersion? I guess they're maintaining in an immersion scenario, they've got two different tracks of teaching core subjects, one in English, one in Spanish, right?
Right, they hire teachers who are bilingual,
Right, yeah,
And a lot of those, I mean, Terrytown does this, I think.
right, yeah, for sure.
I mean,
as an opt-in program.
right.
So it's not for all,
you
so
can
that's
choose-
the other thing that I would point out, is that there are school districts who do this, but they don't do it for all students. They do it almost as a magnet. White Plains does it as a magnet,
Right, right.
so.
And, you know, they probably have I'm sure they have a much larger portion of native Spanish speakers than we do, which changes
Yeah.
the nature of
So.
instruction. Could we do it as an opt-in? Is there any reason that that's not a good approach?
I mean, that's
That would be less
a
cost.
much bigger
Yeah,
conversation.
I think it's a much larger conversation, and it becomes a bit of a philosophical shift, I think, in our approach to education, which I think involves much more community dialogue. But then I think it's also, Raina, the worth noting side of things, if we're looking at an immersion program, then we're also looking at serving the same number of kids. So in essence, we may be looking at releasing some of our current teachers to make space for new bilingual teachers.
The other thing that I would point out that would be, I think, challenging in Irvington, which is so small, is how many sections of it would you have? So once you put your child in that immersion program, if you wanted your child to go up through immersion the whole time, they would be with the same students throughout, because you would have just so many sections of it. So, I mean, again, not impossible, but that would require a lot more, I think, planning, research, conversation, before we move forward on
Right,
something like
right.
that.
And I suppose you'd have to deal with special education requirements,
Yeah.
some of those,
Which would
Yes.
which would be
much
another
more complex,
complication.
Very complex.
It somehow seems to me that we, you know, it may well be desirable to have Irvington students be much better, learn foreign languages more deeply and maybe learn more than one more systematically, and something like this. One of the top line things might do it. It would be a big shift, you know, and it's something the community should consider, I think. But we really have to kind of start with the question of where do we want our graduating seniors to know and to be able to do, to have our education be the quality of education and deliver the impact we want it to do. And then we'll work backwards into what does that require us to do in the high school, the middle school, the elementary grades to make that happen. You know, to think about the elementary grades on its own is, to me, is just kind of a little bit putting the cart before the horse. But I do think we're kind of well overdue for a pretty systematic thinking about what we're doing in languages and whether we should reconfigure the whole system in a more effective way.
Well, that's what you've been doing with your consultant for the last year, 2 years.
Well, yeah, but a
Yeah.
lot of that is it's taking the same structure and they're not changing the nature of the classes we're offering. But it's still I don't know what the designations are, Spanish 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever.
No, we're actually, that's one of the things that we're looking at right now and just in conversation about, which is really, is that the way that language should be looked at as year 1, 2, right? So you finish year 2, you go on to year 3. A lot of the, and ACTFL, which is the main organization around language, looks at the whole idea of novice, advanced, intermediate, not intermediate, advanced, and that's how they actually start to look at students. So we're not there. I mean, we're not looking to make any great, major changes right now. I think our most significant change is a focus on speaking, and that what we really want our students to be doing is after X number of years, and we have a lot of students who love language and they stay with language for 5 years. As we know, our Latin program is amazingly strong. So a lot of our students go all the way through to year 5 of Latin. So I think we're really proud of our program, and one of the areas for growth has been, if we're gonna go through 5, 6, and sometimes 7 years, right? If I start in middle school, we should walk out speaking the language. And that's how we all acquired language first. We didn't read and write first, right? We all spoke first, and
Yeah, but
so.
again, I still don't think that reasoning doesn't follow to me.
I
Just
know.
because we as babies didn't do it that way doesn't mean that's not how high school students should do it.
So just for clarity, it's language acquisition, no matter what language it is.
Yeah,
So-
but it's different when you're a baby.
So just to repeat again, the focus of the work with the consultant right now is in secondary.
6 through 12.
6 through 12 to focus more on the ability to speak the language.
So it's a combination, it's greater alignment. So one of the, a strong area of work has been that they're defining units of study in the same units in both languages. So I would say that it used to be, and we have really great language teachers, so I think our language instruction, in many ways, it's focused very heavily on grammar. I would say they would all say that if they were sitting here. And so the shift is to really define the units, make the units very age-appropriate, developmentally, have kids learning the language in units that they're interested in. So for instance, one of the units that they're developing for 8th grade is on social media in 9th grade. So like really to make them topical in areas of interest that students really are interested in learning to speak about, whether it be in English or some other language. The other thing is that the units would be the same. So if whether my child is taking French or Spanish, the focus of the unit, for instance, social media, would be, there would be a French unit on that, and there would also be a Spanish unit on that. And that speaks to our greater alignment, I think, across the district, where we're trying to look across and say, what are the experiences for our kids, and what are the assured experiences for our students? So that's the work that they're doing now, with the infusion of more speaking activities, more speaking opportunities for students, more speaking to each other, working with the teacher.
What is the thinking, if any, about, I'll go to a sore subject.
Do you have to go to a source?
I get one a night.
You want this one?
I want this one.
Okay.
The idea that, I mean, and I'll say personally, it would be hard pressed for anybody to argue to me that our students are going to get more out of studying French than they would out of Spanish and Mandarin. If our
Wait,
goal is-
what are you saying?
Oh, this is his attack on French. Yes, there we go.
Let me go. You know, that if we're looking for, and I told you I was gonna get deeper, if we're looking for students to be, college preparedness, getting ready for the workforce, getting out there in business,
I think it's,
French is not the dominant language.
I think it's
And has there
Arabic.
any thoughts about moving away from French? I've said this in the past,
Okay.
and people with berets show up and they sing French.
Did anybody go to Canada this past year?
Thank
Thank you.
And I took French for 4 years, so just, and I took Latin for 4 years as well. But, I mean, has there been any thought, because listen, our resources are limited.
Well,
Right.
and why Mandarin?
Because it's spoken by many more people than speak French.
And
And
it's,
so is Hindi.
And it's, right, exactly, exactly. But
But-
you made my point.
But when I was in Beijing as a student,
Right,
I used French to speak to the ticket seller,
Because you didn't
Because-
speak Mandarin,
and he didn't speak English,
but you didn't speak
but we
Mandarin.
spoke French together.
To take from Bob's point, but go a different direction, I've been excited when I've heard back from a few students at the high school who've been able to go and study in other countries for a period of time. What is our school's support or relationship with students who would want to take advantage of that opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, right now, do we have a plan in place? No. We'd like to have a plan in place? Is that something that we should be offering as a school? Yes. I don't think we have any question.
How difficult is it to,
set up
Yeah.
exchange type programs? It's establishing partnerships with responsible, reliable companies. There's some that are money-making organizations and concerned about their alignment with different political groups and the like. But there's a number of organizations out of the area that you can do that. The district had, related to world language travel in general, had gone on a hiatus for a number of years. And if you recall, last year, we just kind of re-energized some of that with the trip to Canada, and then we were planning the trip to Paris this year. And due to the unfortunate situations over there, that was postponed. So our first effort was to start to give our students more international experience, and one thing for consideration down the road is certainly to find those opportunities and to not only have our students travel abroad, but to enrich our experiences by welcoming those from other countries to Irvington.
is there a way to pilot it without sort of opening it up to a wide number, or is it,
I don't
you
know.
either
That's a
have to
good
do it or you don't?
I'm not, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to look into that. I'm not sure what piloting it would
Yeah.
look like at this point. I don't know, but we can certainly.
So Bob, instead of getting rid of French, we're talking about doubling down on
Thanks to you, thanks to
Yeah.
the suggestion.
So, and I want to say, we're certainly respect some of the points that Bob was making. From an administrative standpoint, we enjoy the opportunity that we provide for our students to study French and think about not only the language and culture-related experience, but there's a passion associated with studying language, and there's a passion associated with studying French and how it relates to students' interest in the arts and the like. So we have no desire to necessarily to end a particular program. But where I see opportunity, and still being mindful of what John's remarks were before, is when you think about an exploratory program where you potentially expose kids to a variety of different cultures and languages on a very introductory level. I think that presents seed for thinking around other opportunities. And maybe that seed then becomes, as Raina and then Bob mentioned, Mandarin. And maybe there's other languages that evolve from that program, that because of the interest and the passion that our students have, and maybe because of the global relevance, that somewhere down the road, we have that ability related to our broader goals to then build out language programs that start to expose kids to more different languages when they hit the secondary level.
Can I
So-
just add one thing on the Mandarin? I mean, I think it's really valuable if we're going to teach something like French or Spanish or Mandarin or chemistry or whatever it is, that we teach it well and that students have good opportunities and that they come out of the district having really learned it well. And if we were going to do Mandarin, it's a harder language to learn. It takes more time. It's harder to find the teachers to teach it. And we're probably going to have to, when we started earlier, it's going to take much more resources. It's not like we can just swap out French for Mandarin. And that's one of the downsides of it, I think, is you can teach French and teach it well and give students good opportunities. There's a lot to the language, to the culture, to the literature, for that matter, that students can benefit from. It's closely related to English, so your ability in English benefits from studying French. So French has that kind of value. I definitely see the value of Mandarin too, and my son is taking it as a freshman in college this year. He sounds Chinese when I talk to him now. But it takes a lot more effort and time.
But I think that's also why you're seeing the strong support for Latin, because
It's it's something we can teach well,
Right,
and
exactly right.
kids really learn something, they've gone through an
Right.
an intellectually rigorous program, and they've come out of it with a good experience that looks good
Right.
when they're going to college, even if they're not going to continue using Latin for the rest of their life. Same with French.
Circling back to elementary K through 6, K through 5. So that last one on the chart, exploratory, is something that basically, not to steal thunder from the presentation that's coming later, because I saw it's noted there, something we could do pretty much right away, but you would have to go back and develop exactly what that is. If at a later date we decided we were going to do FLES or FLEX, this is separate from that.
Yes.
And then in terms of when you bring up time in the day, one of the things I enjoy reading are the number of articles that parents and others share about an activity that is incredible for developing critical thinking, and sometimes it's language, sometimes it's music, sometimes it's could be STEM. So I guess that's another question we have to figure out in terms of how much can we do in elementary during a school day, and which of these options do we want to prioritize? So I don't know if we have the answer to that question.
Well, I think to a certain degree, STEM certainly has, we've started that process. So I don't imagine, based on, and not just based on the next generation science standards, but the next generation science standards do have a strong reflection of STEM-based learning, some of which we're doing in our math, maybe it'd be in our math class or in some of our science classrooms. But I would imagine that that's going to be pretty demanding as we roll out. They're hopefully adopting the next-gen science standards, the New York next-gen science standards, and that will be a significant change for us moving forward starting next year, and developing that curriculum. And what Project Lead the Way has done for us is it's given us a window into how we might accomplish that. But I do think that there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure to ensure that we have a STEM-based curriculum throughout our elementary classrooms.
The next gen, when you bring that up, is that something that we'll have to be teaching to those standards next year, or developing curriculum to teach it in the
Yeah.
future?
So next year, we'll start to do the curriculum work behind it. Science with Rubicon Atlas will be an area that K through 5, there are not units developed for science, because that would not have been good use of teachers' time. They would have just been putting in old units of study. So next year would be curriculum development for science, as well as where we really do need to do some curriculum development work around social studies, because there have been significant changes to that as well. Right now, and I don't know, we don't do this only because of the threat of assessment. Eventually, New York State will change the 4th grade science test, and our students will have to take it. But I think more than that, it's the kind of learning that we want our students to be doing. This is really what is driving the work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raina.
We'll look forward to having a little more discussion about this during the budget discussion, I think, right? All right, so I guess it's on to special education cost analysis, so I can introduce myself on this one. The analysis that you're about to see started with a discussion the board had, I believe it was in February, but it might have been in early March, and a presentation that Scott and Gail did that was mostly a PowerPoint presentation. And as you can see here, what we're looking at tonight is not a PowerPoint presentation. It is an Excel spreadsheet. Because what it seemed to me in that meeting, what we needed to do is to try to reconcile how our special education expenses had changed from a hypothetical point, which we decided as a board was roughly 10 years ago, so that's 2005-06. So what I did to accomplish this analysis is I met with Gail and really Scott, and I spent time with Bev, had a lot of email exchanges with them to essentially get this data together and then just lay it out in a way that makes it relatively easy, if you like numbers, to understand what has changed in our special education costs over the last 10 years. And you'll see also in the middle, we have a 5-year sort of break point in the middle, so you can sort of see what happened in the first 5 years between 05, 06 and 10, 11, and then what happened in the 5 years since then. I think, do we have a pointer? Is that possible?
Yeah.
Yep, so that actually points.
It does.
I've never used the pointer here. Does it point? Right?
Point it at your hand.
Am I doing it wrong?
No, I think it's just that button.
There it is.
Hold on, which was it? It's just that.
It's not showing up there.
The angle, I guess.
What am I doing wrong? Oh, I see. It's just not very bright. This is definitely not going to take down any airplanes. All right. I'm going to just have to talk to this then. All right. So first, I just want to make sure, does the audience have this?
They do.
Elaine? Okay. So maybe it's easier to just walk through the spreadsheet, and I'll periodically talk to the screen overhead. So as I started,
I don't know if that'll work out.
is it? Oh, maybe that's a good way to do it.
157, see there? I don't know.
Right. All right. So in 2005, I'm not going to talk through all these numbers, don't worry. I'm just going to try to give it an overview. To ground ourselves, the top 3 rows, the beginning of the numbers that are highlighted in green, that's the total budget for the school district, $42.1 million in 2005-06, which has grown to $57.7 million with the 15-16 budget. So that represents, in my fine print over here, a 3.7% average annual growth rate in that 10-year period. And if you take out special education from that number, exclude it, then the growth rate was 3%. The special education budget, as a portion of that, is $4,156,000 in 05-06, about 10%. You can see that math is simple. 4 million is 10% of 42 million. And it has grown to 8,382,000. And in the other board meetings, the meetings that I referenced earlier, we were sort of saying it doubled, which it has doubled in the 10-year period. And it is now 14.5% of our total budget in 15-16. And the average growth rate then, the average annual growth rate is 10.1%. So logically, the growth rate for special education expenses has been about 3 times, a little less than 3 times greater than the growth rate for the budget overall. So the question then that we ask ourselves as school board members, and I presume people in the audience as well, is why is special education cost growing at that rate relative to our total budget? So then I started looking at students, and these are just the different student populations within special education. But before we get there, the first row there is the total student enrollment in the school district, just to sort of ground us that the total student enrollment has gone down slightly, about a little less than 1% a year over 10 years. So it's gone from 1959 to its present 1769. And then we look at the different populations within our special education world, beginning with 504s, which, as we all know, are not generally considered students with disabilities. They're students with 504s. They're accommodations. And, but nevertheless, we're going to count them in this analysis because they are overseen, obviously, by our special education team. And there are other groups of students that they also look after, which we'll get to in just a second. But you can see the growth rate in 504s is about 1.6% a year, going from 100 to 116 in 15-16. And then we get into students with disabilities classified with IEPs. And I broke that down into different types of populations because different types of IEPs potentially have a different impact on costs. So students with residential placement, you can see we had a very large growth rate going from 2005-06 to 10-11, but it's largely flat since then. Out-of-district day schools, so that's our day tuition students. And so then we add that up and we can see that our total out-of-district population is essentially flat since 10-11, but a pretty hefty increase since 05-06. And then we have students that we're educating here in our district, and that includes students with one-to-one aids and students with other IEPs. That is, they're not, their IEP does not specify one-to-one aid. And you can see the biggest growth rate in recent years is definitely in students with other IEPs, not students with one-to-one aids. In fact, that students with one-to-one aids has gone down since 05-06. Perhaps Scott and Gail can speak to that, but I know that Scott wasn't here in 05-06.
But the numbers aren't so far off the 05-06 numbers. I mean, they're
No,
actually.
no, and the total number of IEP, exactly, it's 175 in 05-06, and now it's 181. So it's really a very, very tiny growth in the number of IEP students, although interestingly, it did go down significantly in that hypothetical 5-year mark in the middle of our analysis here, went from 175 to 157, and so it's conceivable, well, I won't add any editorial comments, I'll just keep going through the numbers because we can save that for the end, and Scott and Gail can comment. I'm sorry, the total students with IEPs, including the students that do go to other schools, currently stands about 207, and I know it fluctuates, so it could be 206, but 208, but as of about 2 weeks ago is 207. And that is somewhat higher than the 192 back in 05-06. It represents about a 0.78% average annual growth rate, so really quite small in terms of the growth. And again, I thought this was surprising just because, we kind of hear anecdotally that the district is seeing a large increase in the number of students with disabilities, and this isn't really showing that, although, again, I'm sure there's some commentary that Scott and Gail can offer. Why don't we move down a little bit further, and at some point I'm going to have to scroll down, so I guess I'll do that right now. Take just a minute to do that. Let's see. Read it there. Okay.
I'll borrow your glasses.
Something happened. The type is being rendered here. Unfortunately, I did this in a Mac, and obviously this is not a Mac. So in order to read the small print over here, you are going to have to look at the printout. In any case, there are additional populations of students that our PPS team looks after, and that's the John Cardinal O'Connor School students, students obviously from other districts that are coming into our district, and then lastly, our preschool students. And that's where there's been substantial growth since 05-06 across all three of those groups. And the growth rate there, I didn't even calculate on an annual basis, but you can tell it's a very, very substantial growth rate in those other students. Now, these students that we're speaking of here are generally not big drivers of cost to the district because they're overseen by our team, but they're not necessarily requiring our teachers and our aides to assist them in their learning process.
We also get money, we get paid back for the students coming from other districts.
That's correct, which I've highlighted below. Yep, that's down below. So our total special education student population has grown about 3.7% annually over the last 10 years. And you can see we're now looking at about 437 students that are overseen by Gail and Scott. Now, so getting into our staff, so there should be, in theory, a correlation between staff and students, particularly, of course, the students with IEPs. And you can see that I've tried to break it down to instructional and non-instructional. So our instructional teachers were relatively flat between 05, 06, and 10, 11. And then in the last 5 years, we've added nearly 8 people. And you can't see it there. I'll just sort of read it out. And thank you, Scott, for saying this earlier today. We've added about 3 ICT elementary teachers between, and this again is between 10, 11 and 15, 16, 2 high school teachers, 2 TAs in our elementary schools, and then 1 social worker. And the social worker was really kind of a swap of the half community aid, but then we hired a full-time instructional position, which is the social worker. And that growth rate then for our teachers in special education is about 2.2%. So the number of, over the 10-year period, the number of additions in that area is just 2.2%. So it's actually a little bit less than the growth rate of the total special education students, but then it's considerably more than the IEP students. Remember, that growth rate was 0.78%. So finally, we have our non-instructional staff. So that's the aides that also support our students and provide them with a calming experience and a learning experience. I broke it down into one-to-one aides and other aides as well as clerical. And you can see that the growth rate for the non-instructional staff was about 1.8%. The big growth rate that we see really is going from 10, 11 to 15, 16, where we went from 35 non-instructional staff to 44. So we added quite a few aides in that period. And again, I think that's something that Scott and Gail can speak to. Now I'm going to move down a little bit further into the costs. And this is really where we can see exactly what's driving the instructional cost and the non-instructional cost on the next page. So our instructional cost, so this is essentially what we're paying all of our teachers who are providing special education learning to our students. We paid them $1,582,000 in 05-06, and in 15-16 is $3,366,000. So if we do a price volume reconciliation, we can see that that's a 12.7% average annual growth rate. That's in the box on the side, which is hard to read again on my screen, so we have to really look at the document here. And that's a 2.2% growth rate in staff, but a 7.4% growth in the cost per FTE. So if you're saying, how did we grow 12.7% a year in our instructional cost? The answer is that most of that growth has come through the cost per FTE, meaning that's essentially the price in the price volume reconciliation. And you can see that down here in the analysis section a little bit lower down on the sheet of paper, where our average salary per instructional position in 05-06 was $55,000. Just 5 years later, that was $92,000. So that's obviously a very large increase in that 5-year period. And then over the next 5 years, the cost actually is quite low by comparison, because it went from $92,000 just to $96,000. And you see on the percentage basis, that was a 66% increase in the first 5 years, but only a 5% in the second 5 years. So that's why over the 10-year period, if you're trying to explain how is it that our instructional costs went up so much, it's mostly explained through the growth in the cost per FTE, which happened in the first 5 years of this period. And then in the second 5 years, we obviously added, those 8 headcounts, and that's really what's driving the remainder of the variance.
Is there any reason to think that our special education instruction costs per head should be different from our regular education cost per head? I mean, isn't it the same salary scale, same contracts, same everything?
I would imagine it would be very close, because,
But for the fact that people are hired at different places and stuff. and
yes,
so
seniority would obviously be playing quite a role.
Not doing anything different for special education in that regard, are we?
No, so probably the teacher salaries as a whole went up significantly in that first 5-year period, because those were contracts that were done under much more favorable economic times.
You have a line here that says average cost for special education.
Yeah, I
student, and you come to,
I was going to get to that one. I mean, I'm kind of working my way down.
Okay.
So finally, I do want to highlight the non-staff special education cost, because this is something that Scott has frequently referenced, and it's definitely borne out here, that the and I will just scroll this down, so everybody at home who's trying to follow, and that's there. So that's this line here, the non-staff costs, and right above that, you can see the out-of-district tuition in 05-06 was $1.2 million, and that has grown to $2.7 million over the 10-year period, and that's a 19% average annual growth rate. So that's clearly another big driver of our costs, of our special education costs, that the cost of sending students to outside schools has gone up significantly since 2005 and 6. And you can actually see that number from the analysis section. The cost per IEP student out of district has gone from 73,000 to 105,000, and then the number of students has gone up slightly, so that's why the total cost has gone from 1.2 million to 2.7 million.
but I should note, that's only a 30% increase versus 72% increase in district.
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, because that's the impact of the salary increase during that 5-year period really had a big increase on the costs overall for educating kids here in Irvington. So, just to kind of finish up the reconciliation, the average cost per special education student is currently at about $12,000. And when I got to that point, I started to ask myself, what does that mean? And the only way to know what that means is if we look at a benchmarking analysis.
But wait a second, what did you use as the denominator for each of those? Because when
The cost per special education student would be all students, all in, so that would be the
but you
400.
acknowledge that the 437 includes students that we don't actually do anything for.
So that's why the cost per IEP student is there as well, so that's currently $28,000.
Because if I do the math of 8,382,000
You have to subtract out.
over, divide by 207, I come up with 40,493.
That's because that would be the blended average of the IEP students in district and the IEP students out of district, right? Because
Well, this is out of district and in district.
Right, that's-
So
I'm-
I'm just not including the JCOS students.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm agreeing with you, because that is the blended average of these two numbers right here, the 28,000 and the 105,000. You get out
Oh, so it's
Yeah.
so really it's 46,300.
for all IEP students, correct?
Per student.
Yep. And that would be a blended average between the out-of-district students, which are 105,000, and the in-district, which are 28,000. So getting back to the question of relativity, on the next page.
Wait, one thing I did note here that I was somewhat pleasantly surprised to see, the tuition from inbound students had jumped 250%.
Yep. And I think that's because we weren't getting a lot of inbound students at all in 05-06, as we've talked about. And that really started.
So if we were to actually take the tuition from the inbound students and separate that out, what does that do to our cost of servicing the ones for whom we don't have any tuition?
I'm not sure.
So if we were to separate out the benefit of the tuition, the students who give us tuition, what is then the cost for servicing the ones that we don't get any tuition benefit from external You can't answer it off the top of your head, it's just, yeah.
Probably those students aren't totally separate in terms of the staffing, so it might be pretty hard to.
Those students are typically in our special programs, so it's another seat in a class where we provide our staffing, and they're in a class with other students that are from Irvington that are exclusively IEP students.
So we do have control over who we accept, and so we wouldn't accept a student that was going to, for instance, push us to need a second ICT section or something along those lines. So your costs are already set for most of those students, because they're going into a class where you're already paying for the teacher and the classroom aid and most of those expenses. So it's an income situation against the budget.
Okay, so that was news to me. I didn't realize we had control over who we accept.
Why don't I get to the benchmarking, then we can always, circle back and can ask some more questions about the reconciliation document. So on the benchmarking, the question was, again, how do we compare to other school districts now that we know a little bit more about how our costs are generated in the special education area? And so this information came by essentially poring over these other school district websites. And as you can see, they offer a varying amount of information publicly. Unfortunately, BOCES does not actually track special education costs. They do an enormous amount of benchmarking for all these different school districts in Westchester and Rockland County, but they don't do anything on special education, so I had to kind of do this by hand. So the enrollment numbers were fairly easy to get. You can see that that's fairly obvious and doesn't really merit much discussion. The special education student number, again, I had to hunt around for it. Dobbs Ferry did put their number out on their website. I happen to know the board president of Pleasantville, so I asked him via email what his number was. So that's 231 for Pleasantville. And then the others, unfortunately, I did not get the number, and that would be something that we could, do. Presumably, that would be easier for you to do than for me to contact these other school districts to get these numbers, because then we could actually do some divisions and see how the average cost per special education student looks across these other districts. But you can see that in Irvington, I compared with the staff FTEs, I compared Irvington to Ardsley. Ardsley has much larger staff, and at first I thought, well, that's because their enrollment is much higher, because it's 22% higher than in Irvington, but clearly they're doing something very different in Ardsley, and this is kind of well known throughout the quad districts and the river towns, that Ardsley has created special programs designed for certain special education students. So there's a much larger staff there. As a result, their instructional cost is about 57% higher than ours, and they have many more teaching assistants. We only have a handful, and they have an army, and as a result, the cost is much higher there. But then, interestingly, their non-instructional staff seems to be lower than ours. And finally, the outside tuition in Ardsley is about 21% lower than ours. But then you go down, and the reason why I sort of put this revenue from incoming students in here is that Ardsley is clearly getting a lot of revenue from incoming students compared to our number, which is 700,000. They're getting $3 million from incoming students, and that's the program that seems to have been designed there to be a self-funding program. It's not really entirely self-funding, obviously, because it's still costing them net $7 million, but it's a program that has a different approach than our program here. And finally, you can see that when you look at the cost per enrolled student, which is the metric that I used just to create some kind of standard benchmark to compare all these different districts to try to take the size of the school district into account, you can see that the cost per enrolled student is about the same in Irvington and Ardsley. In Dobbs Ferry, the cost per enrolled student is quite a bit lower, and their enrollment is lower, and their total special education costs are about 32% lower than ours. So as a result, their cost per enrolled student is 18% lower than ours. Because they did put their special education students on their website, I was also able to calculate the cost per in-district IEP student, which is about 8% lower than ours. And then Edgemont, you can see on a cost per enrolled student basis, they're about 15% lower than Irvington. Briarcliff, 34% lower than Irvington. Then we get to Pleasantville, and Pleasantville is interesting because it's about the same size as Irvington in terms of enrollment, about the same number of special education students, a little bit more. And then their costs actually are more aligned with ours, except that the outside tuition, their outside tuition is 45% lower than ours. And so as a result, their entire special education budget is about 5% lower than ours. So Pleasantville is kind of an interesting one to look at. I mean, for me, Pleasantville and Ardsley were kind of the most interesting because one is very similar to ours, and Ardsley is clearly very different and has a different model, but that's sometimes interesting to look at. Finally, Bronxville has a very low cost per enrolled student. Their total special education budget in Bronxville is only $5.1 million, and that's 40% lower than ours. So clearly they're doing something different in Bronxville. I suppose it's probably known within your community, like which of these schools are doing things differently from a cost perspective and a program perspective.
What's interesting about Bronxville is they seem to have flipped the teaching assistants and the non-instructional staff.
Yes, that's
relative to
right.
us.
Yep.
And then the other costs, they have significant other costs that we don't have, but the outside tuition.
I think that's because they're using outside services, maybe. There is a line in their budget for outside, like, they're paying third-party yeah, exactly.
And yet
That's
they're-
what that 1.3 million is.
And then their overall costs, though, are, as you point out, almost 40% lower than ours. 5 versus 8.
And the challenge is we don't know the sample there. So, what is their
You have
sample
to-
students,
So you'd
right?
assume that if the total student body is 1718 and ours is 1769, it's somewhere in the range.
Well, here's the
Particularly if
I mean,
you look at the number,
if I-
if you look at the instruction expense is 3.2 and ours is 3.2.
I mean, the interesting thing about this, and Phil, I mean, you've done a yeoman's job in putting all these numbers together. It couldn't have been easier, not very, very time consuming. The problem that I see when you're looking at, and I'm not saying that it makes these numbers incorrect or they're not instructive, because I think they are very instructive, but when you're looking at special education, these decisions are not made based upon 240 kids that are in special education, right? Each of these decisions, and we know this as a board over the years, are made based upon individual children's needs. So, I think the numbers are very instructive. To really understand where the costs come from, I think you'd have to look at each of the individual students and the costs related to that to try to, because I think that you may not be comparing apples to oranges in any given year.
Well, I think there's probably some truth to that, but I do think that it's worthwhile to compare ourselves to some other districts to see if there are other districts that do some things better than we do, and
Yeah, no
and
question.
look for opportunities to contain costs.
No question. I just, I guess I just caution when you're looking at these numbers and, this, Bronxville's 40% less. It's not that simple. And it's not as simple as, looking at numbers of employees, et cetera, et cetera. They could have a lot less people in Bronxville supported than we do in Irvington. There's so many variables that go into that.
I think all we're saying is it's worthwhile to take a look and to better understand what the other districts are doing.
Well, it would be relatively easy to keep filling this in, all the different holes, because there's clearly quite a few holes in here. And that might shed some light that all districts would benefit from, to know that this is this is how their costs line up, against these other schools.
And I just want to say, and not everybody is going to budget exactly the same way. there's going to be costs that we're including in our budget that they don't include theirs in the same kind of ways. And not everybody is going to be as eager to want to necessarily compare their data in the same way. So we're having this conversation that's very open, and we're on one end of the spectrum. But if all of a sudden we go through and pull out data that makes it look differently, some folks on the other end are going to be reluctant to maybe not look as good as they currently do. So there's maybe some challenges in getting that together, but I guess the one point I want to make, when it kind of ends up going from the PPS office to the business office, there's different ways some things are accounted for. So for example, legal costs in the special ed world, and so that's the work of our lawyers supporting everything that's happening, as well as a number of legal settlements that the district has in special education. Those sat outside our special ed budget at one point in time, and when the district's general legal fund, and Bev has moved that into it for more accurate accounting. So there's some nuanced things that are different.
And that's something that was very obvious when I was doing the analysis, that other districts don't typically put their legal costs in special education.
Yeah, and then there's other things that look like Pleasantville, for example, is much like Ardsley in that they run a number of programs to serve special needs populations. So there's some differences there. So I'm assuming they have some revenue that's going to be more along the lines of what we see in Ardsley because of the programs they run. When we think of Edgemont only has half-day kindergarten. So when you think of kindergarten students that have special needs, they're servicing them for a smaller portion of the school day. So there's a lot of nuance that goes into this that I think we'll never have a perfect comparison, but I agree, and we've been having conversation a lot about the types of programming that we have. I think there would be some value in Gail and Scott adding some commentary in and around, the types of disabilities we see, how we see them differently, and then also and not a lot of detail, guys, but to think about the preschool impact and the JCOS impact, because and Phil, I don't want this to come out the wrong way, we just don't look after them because there's a lot of management and a ton of human resource hours that go into it beyond the administrative side, especially with the preschool, because now we have to facilitate all the testing for preschool when that used to be done on the county side of things. So we've seen this massive increase in numbers, but now in the last 3 years, we're responsible for the testing where the county did all that. So there's a huge manpower issue, which kind of relates to some of the things we have. So I think maybe start there and provide some commentary, and then to generally talk about the types of disabilities and how that relates to the IEPs and the level of service kids have gotten. Just make sure you use the mic, please.
The world starts with preschool. So when Scott and I began in the '07 school year, our numbers for preschool were relatively low. As of today, so preschool is students ages 3 and 4. We are at 67. It's the most we've ever had. So when Dr. Harrison referenced the manpower of testing students, that's not for all students, that's for students transitioning into kindergarten. So years past, the county and the providers would provide us with data so we could determine needs. That is no longer the case. It is all on the district responsibility. So that has become a financial impact. The work of those other students is not done in-house, other than through me at this point. So it's all outsourced to the county. So it's just the actual management of those students. But there will be always an impact as those 4-year-olds are coming into kindergarten for 5. Okay.
And obviously those higher numbers may translate to higher numbers within our programs as they become school age. Please understand the criteria for classifying students as having a disability are different at the preschool level than they are at the school age level. So it's not unusual at all for a student to qualify for CPSE services and then become declassified at the point of entering kindergarten. So there's a second layer of evaluation that occurs at that point. So those numbers don't automatically guarantee higher numbers in our programs, but certainly it's something that we're paying close attention to as something that could potentially have future costs for us.
You could have 3 students who need to be evaluated in the middle of the year they will be going to kindergarten. So you have students this year that are 4, they're turning 5 by their kindergarten eligibility year. they need to be evaluated. If those needs are significant enough, they're going to require classification coming to kindergarten. We don't have those numbers. We don't have the census to tell us who was born and living here to be able to consider any trajectory. A lot of guessing.
Similarly, the John Cardinal O'Connor School is another factor that sounds like it doesn't impact us a lot because we don't use our own teachers and our own staff for the most part to provide those services. We contract for them and we are able to bill back to the home school district minus the state aid that we get for those students. So we have to back that piece out of what we charge the home district. But that said, all of the management for all the CSE meetings, and when you look at the number of students at John Cardinal O'Connor and you multiply that out by a CSE meeting for each one of those students, which generally have to happen in the summer because there's a law in place that parents have to request services by June 1st. So we don't know who's going to be asking or needing services at John Cardinal O'Connor for sure until June 1st, which then necessitates pushing the meetings into either June, which is a very busy time and really doesn't permit us to do them then, or doing them over the summer. So we are paying our staff over the summer to populate the CSE table all summer long to run all of those CSE meetings. So that is an expense piece that we incur because of the John Cardinal O'Connor School.
There are required members at any CSE meeting, so as much would be great sometimes to scale back. It's an impossibility.
Right. That's governed by state and federal law. So those are, impacting factors beyond our own population, but as I alluded to in the presentation we made before, we've seen shifts within the types of disabilities and the levels of disabilities that we're experiencing across our student population. For instance, I indicated it, we looked at that analysis. We went from 7.5% of our classified population as being other health impaired in the 05-06 school year, and currently we're up to 25.6% of our population.
Sorry, what's that? What was that?
Other health impaired, which is notably along the line, which drove some of that, was the federal ruling that attention deficit hyperactivity disorder became includable in that total. So when you look at that kind of increase versus our speech language impaired population, which has dropped from 25% to 15%. As an easy example, many students with speech language impairments only require speech language therapy. They don't need to be in any kind of in an ICT classroom in many cases. They just need the speech therapist to be seeing them 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more or sometimes fewer. So when we look at the numbers of increasing those ICT sections, it may not be an overall increase in the numbers of students, but if those students require more intense services through an ICT classroom versus just the speech language therapist seeing them a couple times a week, obviously we have an impact on staffing. And the other area we saw was learning disabilities dropping from 33 to 28. Learning disabilities are also tend to be less staff intensive in terms of dealing with them. Other health impaired students many times carry, not always, and I don't want to paint them all with the same brush, but we certainly have students that have significant behavioral issues that drive some of those one-to-one aid needs. We talked about an initial fluctuation in that aid population, and one of the differences was when we went to ICT classes, we took some of those one-to-one aids and repurposed them into the ICT classrooms, thus needing fewer one-to-one aids, and unfortunately that caused a dip, and then it's come back up in the interim because of the nature of the needs of our students. I think Bob's point, I'll reiterate, and it's very poignant because these decisions are made based on individual needs and based on state and federal law that precludes cost being a factor that's considered at the table. So we really need to provide the services that are necessary to help support the students as a requirement of both state and federal law.
Okay.
I think one other factor is we've had a number of students that have moved into the district, some of whom have been fairly high-cost students over the last couple of years.
And who are already classified.
When they came.
Right. Okay, well, again, just to reiterate, my purpose in doing this was to try to answer the question that the board members had about what had changed in the 10-year period, and I think hopefully between my analysis, your commentary, this has added some, shedded some light on the mystery of how our special education budget doubled in 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Phil, as I was going to echo that as well, because certainly it's been an illustrative process, and
Yes.
we've learned some things along the line as
Wanna-
well.
Yeah, you can, I said it's fine, you go to the mic, you can comment, it's fine. Sure.
I'm just wondering why the social worker was included as part of the staff for the students with IEPs and 504s?
Because in this analysis, the community aid was in the non-instructional line, and the social worker was in the instructional line, but that is where it's not, it's a good point you're making, because the social worker's services are not limited purely to students with disabilities, but salary resides in the line that's paid out of the students with
In
this.
that area.
Correct.
Really looking, but if here, read, you might pull that out.
We'd have to look at the percentage of her time that's spent on one versus the other, right?
Yeah, and then you could even argue it should be in the PPS side, right? You could argue that.
You could argue that indeed.
Thank you. Okay, so now on to our main presentation. We're sort of delaying the inevitable. I don't know. But it's actually good news, so we're looking forward to hearing this.
Okay, let's hope the remote is on. So we've gone through quite a process thus far, and you can certainly read the slides before you, but you can see that this is the sixth presentation and public discussion the board has held related to the budget. And I guess the important pieces to look at is that, you know, we started off talking about needs with our administrative team, talking about the initiatives that were in place in the school district that we wanted to continue to support. And then we moved into a state of the budget where we really talked about the challenges that you've read about in the paper, that maybe you've seen in some of the other documents, and how we really are being held back in a lot of ways by not only a flawed tax cap, but some failed legislation along the way that the state is now trying to make some efforts to correct. And so we got into a difficult situation. We were talking about our tax cap actually being negative. So when we think about a 2% tax cap, generally speaking, we assume that you take your tax levy and you're able to grow at 2%. Well, no, it's formulaic, and it's tied to a number of things, and the most predominant factor that it's associated with is looking at CPI or inflation, and we know that is an incredibly low number. But then when you calculate into other factors, including our reduced debt that we had in the district, it actually resulted in a negative figure, a negative 0.07%, or negative $37,000. So to think about moving our full operation forward one year, maintaining all the services that we had, we'd have to do so, but with $37,000 less from our taxpayers here in the community. So we outlined that process. Then we went into 2 meetings where we broke down different components of the budget. February 23rd, we talked about the operational side. March 8th, we talked about the curricular side. And then at the last meeting right before break on March 22nd, I presented my proposed budget. In that budget, we were in a position where we're over $500,000 over cap at that point in time. And now tonight, we move forward, taking the feedback from the board and the community at the last meeting with a new look at the budget. So in doing so, we recognize that this is a journey, that clearly we've started off with conversations talking about the challenges that we face, talked about the needs that we have, we talked about going over the cap, and now maybe we're going to have a little bit of a different conversation tonight. And through this process, I have to say it's been really thoughtful. We're not just throwing things out there and thinking about, you know, this feels good at the moment. We're thinking about sustainability. We're thinking about a balanced approach and looking at our facilities. And trying to sustain excellence in our schools, thinking about the types of experiences that we enjoy for our students, and wanting to make sure it's a well-rounded, balanced program for all of our kids. But at the same time, we have to balance that with a responsible tax levy and responsible tax rates to consider that impact on our community. So coming from March 22nd, as I said, there's a bit of a shift. We were talking about going over the tax cap originally, and there was a change in the dialogue that evening, and there was a desire to take a look at what it would look like if we went under the cap. We also knew that there was going to be additional state aid coming out related to the state budget, which was announced last week. There was a request to identify some further savings in our budget, and we could consider the use of additional fund balance, but to not rely on the fund balance to try to balance the budget. So the steps that we've taken that I'm going to highlight for you tonight, some of the good news is that we're getting another $158,000 in state aid. Linking our conversation back to the most recent of special education, and looking at where we are and the work that's going on here, we're actually seeing a reduction of approximately $300,000 in special education costs. And in doing so, I want to be clear that we're not reducing any programs or services to our students. We're looking at opportunities to reduce tuition expenditures, kids going to different schools, or some of those students actually returning to the Irvington schools to be educated at a lower cost. And then also looking at that large number of teaching aides that we talked about before and identifying a means to reduce a few of those positions. We've looked at buildings and grounds expenditures, and we've been able to reduce that by $106,000, and then some reductions to professional development that we can talk about as we move further along. So again, I think this is a balanced approach. It's a theme in my commentary tonight. We're maintaining our existing programs. When it comes to professional development, and Dr. Kaur could elaborate if need be, but the thought here is we can still deliver the support that our teachers need. We look at the vast amount of work that's been done over the past few years, the rollout to the Common Core, launching a lot of the curriculum work that Dr. Kaur has been leading, has been very intensive, looking at professional development. But we've made substantial progress in that area, and we believe that we can sustain our efforts and our teachers' needs moving forward with $25,000 less dollars. We're looking at our buildings and grounds upkeep. We've made a lot of progress in the last few years. We established regular maintenance cycles, some preventative maintenance, we have regular painting cycles in our schools. So there's some things we can back off on a little bit, but we're also thinking that there's opportunity this year to be able to do some of the work that we're planning to do next year in this year's budget. And one of the great things here that we've come up with, and when we think about special ed once again, in Beverly's office, and working with PPS and the state, we've been able to acquire an additional approximately $250,000 in special education aid for high-cost special needs students. And in doing so, we have some additional revenue this year. So we could tackle a lot of those projects, we believe, within this year's budget. So it's not that we're going to be neglecting things. We're still going to be able to tackle a lot of those projects. Additionally, some of the work that was included in the budget, we're actually going to be able to do some of that work in-house now. And we hired a maintenance worker last year, which we didn't have in the past, and he's going to be able to tackle some of those projects for us. Despite these reductions, we're also looking for some opportunities to enhance things. And to come back to our world language conversation a little while ago, and you can see the flow to our conversations this evening, we have that opportunity to think about growing world language in the elementary school level. And this 0.4 FTE will relate to the bottom set of cells on Dr. Kaur's presentation before. We talked about the exploratory opportunity in 5th grade. So this will be able to expand some experiences, whether it's focused on world language or pure enrichment for our students. But at the same time, you look at that number of 0.4. Well, obviously, you add a 0.6 to that and you have a full-time employee. And one of the concerns that you often have when you have especially excellent teachers, but any teachers that are part-time, that most of them are going to be looking for full-time employment. So by being able to round out a language position to a 1.0 gives us the opportunity to secure an excellent teacher for a longer period of time. And then we come down to the next addition here. In looking at Project Lead the Way in our STEM program, early in this process we talked about opportunities to grow technology at the elementary school, to continue to grow our Project Lead the Way at the elementary and middle school, and we've backed off from that, recognizing the financial constraints that we're facing. But when we're looking at the high school STEM program, we actually are required to provide a sequence of programs, and we need to add another course to our sequence. And in doing so, we just need a staff member. So just like the math before, I'm talking about world language, a 0.2 plus a 0.8 equals a 1.0, and we have an opportunity to think about an outstanding part-time science teacher that we could be able to secure for a longer period of time with a 1.0. But also, we're able to deliver an additional course in our sequence through the science program that would meet the Project Lead the Way standards. And then finally, an investment in our technology infrastructure with the replacement of a network switch, which we talked about at the last meeting, at a cost of about $85,000. So what does this all mean? So when we turn around and how did we get to this bottom line? A number of reductions and adjustments that we've seen. So, and Beverly, if there's questions, you certainly could speak to some of them here. But thinking about some facilities work that I said that we can forego and some things that we can do this year. And there's a list that I'm not going to be able to read to you at this moment. But looking at a lot of this that we're going to be able to accomplish during this current budget cycle. We're also looking at some opportunities here where Bev did some additional analysis and found that we had been underspending one particular line, which is additional work for teachers in the K-6 range, which is a budgetary category. And there was a figure of $4,000 in 4 to 6 tutoring that had been there. And typically when you think of tutoring, we think of kids that are either suspended from school and require home instruction, or kids that are ill from school and require home instruction. And we're quite fortunate not to have many students suspended in grades 4 through 6. And it's a budget line that we have not had to tackle. So it was an easy reduction on our part. The professional development that I've identified, reduction in our fuel expenditures, now a reduction in special education tuition, $212,000. And looking at that as what I referenced before, change in placements for students, either students that they've been able to return to the district or more affordable placements that will result in that savings. And then a combination of reducing 2.5 aide positions for about $125,000. So therein we find about $512,000 of savings. But sure enough, we went back in and added a few $100,000 more. And looking at the cost of a 0.4 world language teacher, 0.2 Project Lead the Way, and the computer switch, which offsets that. And so at the end of the day, when we're looking at this, we're seeing a 1.1% budget increase, which is quite a different story than we've seen on budget increases around the region and, of course, in Irvington in past years. So when we think about our projected revenue, these are numbers, some of them that are in flux, because we know that you can't always count on the revenues materializing as you expect they would. So when we look at some adjustments to actual property taxes and what we anticipated receiving, there's a decrease. An actual number for a pilot, which is a payment in lieu of taxes, there's a bit of a decrease than originally seen this year. But the big increase here is looking at state aid figure, $615,000, almost 19%. That's huge, and that's really a saving grace for us this year. So that's a combination of about $260,000 in new state aid for high-cost students that Beverly and her staff were able to identify, coupled with another $330,000 of new state aid associated with the state budget this year. And then you can see other numbers in fluctuation, a little decrease in BOCES rental because they're going to be using one less classroom in one of our schools. So at the end of the day, you can see how things balance out. And looking at a budget variance of $636,000, which again is that 1.1% budget-to-budget increase, and means that we're $304 under the tax levy cap. So, yes, yeah, and all accomplished over spring break, right? So just an overview of our expenditures, and this is a line. This is something that just, I don't want to really go through and talk about each of these, but when you look at the variances down that right-hand column, to see the number of negative figures there tells a story, and it talks about some of the savings that have been in place, whether it's transportation, utilities, decreases in debt service, and that comes to board action, Beverly recommendation, and looking at refinancing bonds that we had and things of the like. But really, to see so many negative numbers is actually a nice change. And then when we look at our tax cap calculation, really no adjustment from previous presentations, but a situation where we do have the negative figure, a negative $37,000 that we're able to raise from our local tax levy. So in sum, these are all our different budget categories, and you can see the variances there. And, you know, realistically, when we go down, the one thing that looks a little different than the past few years is the new consideration category, which really hasn't shifted too much. So the tax rate, something that was a hot item here in Irvington this evening. This is something that's difficult to really kind of process.
Actually, in truth, wouldn't you be putting those 3 new things into the budget, new budget consideration?
They probably should be there, yeah. A good catch. A good catch. The numbers are worked in, but they just weren't added to the new consideration category, right, Bev?
Right.
Yeah.
I was,
Yeah,
over the spring break.
Yes, I know. I just wanted, it's the way you said it made me think, well, those are kind of new considerations.
Yeah, so well, let's add another $383,000. So,
Making more work for Bev, I'm sorry.
No, one little edit we'll make. So with that said, looking at our tax rate. So we can see what the tax rate was for the current school year. And now we know that the assessments change every year. And if you follow board business at all, if you look at board agendas, you know that we have a number of tax certs each year. And, you know, I heard Mr. Feiner a couple hours ago talk about, you know, $10 million coming out of this area each year in refunding back taxes to local building owners. And you know, so that has a real impact. So you start to look at the assessed value dropping because of that. But had we tax rate or assessments remain the same going into next year, we would have only seen an increase here of 0.12%. However, as I said, we know that there are shifts. You can see the changes here in looking at the assessed value. Shifts from the 73.6 million to the 72.8, and unfortunately that drives a larger increase for us. So we're actually looking at a tax rate increase of 1.25%. So a little illustration of what this would look like for different homes in our community, and you can certainly do the math on this to figure out where you may stand. And looking at this, the average home in Irvington, which is assessed at $803,000, those folks would see an estimated change of $214 in new taxes. The one thing that I do want to highlight, that when we think of the assessed value of your home, what is going on with the reassessment does not relate to this. That does not kick in for another year. So what we're looking at is what your current assessment is on your property. And then a little look at our budget trends over the years, the lowest percent tax increase in the last 6 years. Looking at a situation, as I said before, 1.1% budget-to-budget increase, and then the lowest tax rate increase that we've seen in ages of 1.25%. So, and kind of to summarize my comments before I throw it back to the board, you know, when we went in through this process, there were a number of different considerations that we brought forward, considerations that were included along the way in the different budgets. And those items are still sitting out there. They have not been included in the budget that your administration has provided for you tonight, but those items are still out there. We're at a point where if those items would want to be included, our recommendation would be to look at fund balance for some of these items. And this illustration then does show us what some of those items were. The first being looking at the addition of some window air conditioning units to a variety of classrooms, which are identified to be some of the hot spots in our buildings. 40 air conditioners at quite a cost of $102,000. And that, because that not only includes the window unit, but it includes the wiring necessary for them, and in some places new circuits needed to be added.
Do we have to budget for energy costs if we do that too?
Bev, do you want to speak to energy costs?
We have not calculated that yet, but I don't think it would be too significant.
And also, the one thing that we look to be accounting for is that conversion of some of the heat controls and conversion to gas we're going to start to realize some savings when we're converting to gas. And conversion to gas at Main Street School for gas heat, we anticipate that being some savings. So we believe that the cost of the utilities associated with that would be offset in some of the savings that we may have.
But that savings to gas is already baked into your budget, right?
Yeah. A percentage of it, but we don't know, and we believe that there may be room there as well, right?
Right.
But exactly, we don't know how much. There was conversation about having a grounds foreman or an outside contractor. So the cost you see before you is for a grounds foreman, someone that would be able to oversee the field maintenance on all of our natural grass fields. And that would range from looking at looking at the aeration, the fertilizing, the overseeding, the repair, managing watering cycles of the fields. One thing to note that within our budget, we're also looking to add irrigation to the lower Dow's fields. So there will be a need for more attention in those areas as well. But this is $91,000. The outside contractor cost we anticipate will come in cheaper. We're in the process of getting quotations, but they take their time coming in, and the first round that we received did not meet all of the standards that we were looking for, and we're only looking at things that our guys are currently doing, so it wasn't improving our services. So we're getting new quotes from them, and potentially at the next meeting we could have some updates there. We had conversation about a library and media specialist, adding a second media specialist here at the campus library. We only have one librarian, shall we say, for a school of 1,000 kids. But this proposal that we came up with had a number of different components. Not only would we be adding leadership and support in the library for our teachers and our students, but tied into this was that we were looking at revamping our study skills program for our sixth graders. Currently, some of that is taught through our technology program, and that we would be able to revamp that, have the new media specialist teach those classes, and then we could then free up our technology teacher to be able to teach more technology, another section at the high school, another section in the middle school potentially. But it was costly, and we put that on the back burner. The engineering has been included, as discussed before. We talked about a technology teacher to be able to expand Project Lead the Way in technology instruction at the elementary schools, an additional psychologist to meet some of the challenges and the complex needs that Scott and Gail referenced a little while ago, and the technology switch that was included in the budget proposal as well. So the sum of these, you can see about $459,000, and you can see the budget impact by adding them. So to include any of these, there would have to be some steps taken, whether that's some painful reductions in other areas, which I don't even know where we would begin, or it would be the conversation of looking at fund balance. So with that said, really it's time for some conversation, board and community. We'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have. We have another meeting coming up on the 12th where the administration is going to be looking for the board to give us direction and where to go, because we need to then finalize a budget for the adoption on the 19th. We have a number of budget presentations coming up. The next being obviously here on the 12th, but then you can see a number of community forums where we can certainly continue dialogue and look forward to educating the community on our budget. So with that said, it's yours, Mr. Whitney.
Thank you. Great job, especially over the spring break. Clearly you were not in Washington, D.C. The budget looks like it's in very good shape right now, but we need to hear from the board to see if everyone feels that way. So I think what we can do is, since we're at the stage in the game now with the budget where we don't necessarily have to separate questions from comments, let's just, go down the run.
Could I make one suggestion?
Yeah, please.
Could we, since there's members of the public here that haven't been here in prior weeks, could we hear their comments first and then take comments from the board?
It's a bit out of the ordinary, but sure, why not?
I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Members of the community, you may speak regarding the budget. Yeah, go to the mic, yeah.
You're on TV now.
Just being new to this, is it possible just to explain?
Remember, please introduce yourself.
Oh, hi, sorry, Clinton Vanderspay, in the village with 3 kids in the school. Just looking at the change in the budget versus the change in the tax rate, why are they different? Why is the budget 1.1 and the change in the tax rate 1.25?
Because there's other revenues other than taxes, so there would be state aid and the other line items in there. So those revenue items changed.
Okay. Good, thank you.
Was that a question about the assessed value?
Rate is,
Right.
change in the tax rate is different from the change in the overall taxes we raise, because the rate is per assessed value, and the assessed value is going down, so that also plays into it.
It's sort of 2 different calculations.
Yeah, that's, or 3, at least.
Or 3, yeah, I guess that's right.
Yes, please.
But that's the other part of it.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm new here. This is my first board meeting. My name is Michelle Soto. I also live in the village, and I have 2 daughters that attend, but this is my daughter's in 9th grade, so first year to high school. The other is in middle school. My first question is, you mentioned the buildings and grounds reduction. Was there any major projects planned that will be affected by that?
Basically, there's some painting, not major, carpet replacement, some painting, and we're hoping to get some of the items done this year instead of next year.
She said buildings and grounds.
That's buildings and grounds. That's all buildings and grounds.
Okay, so my other question initially was what would be offered at the high school, the new program for PLTW, but I think that it looked like it might be engineering. Is that true? What grade would that be offered to?
It's open to almost all grades, mostly to 10th, 11th, and 12th graders.
Okay.
Well, it's the 3rd year of the sequence you're adding,
But
right?
with that's the nice thing about the Project Lead the Way engineering, it's not in sequence. In other words, you can take one class, you don't have to have one to take the other.
Oh, what is the class going to be in?
The new class is, oh God, I'm old. I have to look it up. I can't remember now. We have architecture, principles of engineering.
civil
It's the new one. It's, no.
That's covering principal, hang on.
No,
I don't have it in front of me.
I'm having a brain freeze. But the point is that it's not in sequence. It's one of the reasons why we like their engineering program, is you don't have to take one first, second, or third. So it allows us to create a rotation. So we can offer certain courses one year, and then the next year rotate in another course. So it's a huge piece. Do you have that there or no?
I don't.
So by not including this one technology teacher, we're not losing that, that's still in place?
We have to do that.
Right,
So
okay.
we'll have to figure out a way to offer that course. We're required by our commitment to Project Lead the Way to offer the 3-year sequence, so.
So my last question, I promise, is about mandates, because I know over the last few years there have been quite a few of them. Is the state paying for all the mandates? Where does that figure into your budget?
Yeah.
See, I made you all laugh, and it's very late.
No, it's, that's a great question to ask, and clearly not. So, we talk about, non-funded or underfunded mandates, right? So the one example that we gave when we talked about this a little earlier was that when we were developing this current year's budget, there was a change in requirements for ESL programming. And that required us to be able to fulfill those standards, required us to add another 0.5 teacher, a half-time teacher, roughly a cost of $50,000, let's say. But we never saw an increase in our related aid, and actually, even though we have a few teachers in the department, we're in a position where we only receive, $6,000 or $8,000 of aid from the state altogether. A conversation that we were having prior to the start of the board meeting is that looking back a number of years ago, that there was actually an analysis that was done in the district to look at some of the effects of the non-funded or underfunded mandates. And we're going to look to try to update some of that. And those are items that have grown through new teacher evaluation model, through rollout of Common Core in some ways. But one area where we can highlight a lot of them is certainly special education being a challenge, as we discussed earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Anyone else? York? my tennis partner.
Hello, my name is Jörg Ast. I have two boys in the school here. Two-part question. Related to the world language .4 teacher, then in your budget you included a full-term employee. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And how is it? What's the decision-making process to then decide what program the district is going to engage in terms of the world languages? Because I think it was interesting to hear the different programs, but what is the decision-making process here? I mean, this didn't seem, this is the first time discussed, and certainly my first meeting here, so obviously I'm just trying to understand that.
That's a good question. I'll take a crack at it. I mean, this is the first time that we have seen world language opportunities laid out like this. I think it was kind of clear in the sense that the proficiency of learning the language was juxtaposed with the underlying cost, which is the number of teachers that would be required, and also with the time commitment. And what really from this point on we do need to address, I think what John has asked, which is what is it that we expect,
Right.
what's the outcome that we're expecting, because in some ways if we're not expecting a sort of complete level of fluency, then why would we be investing in having an elementary program that is driving children to fluency? And I'm not saying fluency is not the objective, I'm just using that as a hypothetical example.
Yeah,
I think
and
we do need to have that discussion about what we expect as the outcome.
I agree, because I understood also that, for example, French is taught every other day, and within 3 years you basically go through one, I don't know what the name of it is, but it takes you 3 years to cover 1 year's worth of program. So it's almost like how do we better spend our money? Is it in beefing up that program? And you might have had all this discussion, but I thought, me as a parent, I would appreciate hearing more about how strategic if we can be more strategic about it in terms of that.
It's definitely not the first time that I've raised this sort of issue.
Mhm.
But the middle school program does, I think, to a lot of parents, I had the experience as a parent too, seem like a lot of time, a lot of years spent relative to the amount of ground you cover in a sense. And you know, it's a fair question.
Yeah, and there's no question, and I think just to add John's and Phil's point, and Robin can correct, the year that we decided to remove the fifth grade, I forget, you know, there are budget considerations as
Right.
well. So that was one of the reasons why I made the comment earlier that we decided to remove the fifth grade sort of exploratory, for lack of a better word, because, you know, were we really getting the bang for the buck in a bad budget year, and can we use that money elsewhere?
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
There are, just to be clear, there are state requirements, in other words, that's not our choice around the year one, so we're required to accelerate in 2 courses according to New York State. So by providing world language in middle school, that counts as one course of acceleration, and for middle school, it is that year, it is the 1 year. So many school districts don't offer language in 6th grade, for instance, so they complete the 1 year of language over the course of 7th and 8th grade. One of the advantages to shifting our thinking and not calling it year 1, year 2, year 3 would really open a door to teaching to different levels of proficiency rather than getting focused on, I've been in something 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, what level of proficiency have I reached for teaching, for learning a language? So that's just it. But there are regulations.
Are you saying we couldn't do more than a year's worth of proficiency, or whatever you want to call it, in middle school, or that's just
Well, there's a
we've got to do a high school level course somewhere. We do earth science, I guess. Art, the studio
We
art
accelerate in
also
science and we accelerate in math.
right, math, right, okay.
But there's a proficiency exam that students take.
Yeah, but we could conceivably, the state law doesn't prohibit us from doing 2 years.
No, I'm just explaining where that original guideline came from.
Okay. That's the minimum if we're going to do language. Well, sort of. We have to do something.
Hi.
All right,
Allison Wagensback, 3 Emery Road. Thank you to the administration for working miracles, it looks like. I think state aid helped, but you guys did a lot of work, so thank you. Just for my ignorance, because people are going to ask me and I need to be able to explain it. If our tax cap is negative 0.07, how is our tax increase 1%? Just so I'm not.
That's the rate, that's not the taxes.
The tax cap is relative to the tax levy.
Right.
Right, so the levy, the levy is.
How much we can
0.07%,
raise, right.
Because we've got all that aid, essentially, which allows us to grow the budget by 1.1%.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought you were talking about the tax rate.
I'm talking about the page where you lay out the
Allison?
increase.
So here's
If you
the
look
page.
right here, the assessed value, see how the assessed value went down from 73 million to 72?
Yeah,
Okay, that's due to tax certs, so that's why it's 1.25% increase. If the assessments had stayed the same, it would only have gone up 0.12%.
okay. So we can raise the taxes above the negative tax cap if our assess.
No, not the tax.
We can't raise the
I'm
overall
sorry, I'm
dollar.
not, my brain doesn't work like this, so.
I'll try to put it in English.
Please, Bob, please.
I do this all day, so.
You studied French, though, now you
I
know English, too.
and
Jeez.
Latin, and Latin, and Latin. The tax cap legislation tells districts how much they can raise their tax levy.
Okay.
That's the calculation.
See the second column there?
This is the overall number of
The
dollars that we
overall
take
number of
from
dollars
the
that we're gonna tell the
taxpayers.
community that we need.
Right.
Then you take that number and you apply it to the assessed value of the property in town.
I see. And then you get a number.
tax rate
Got it.
to the individuals.
Got it.
So it's really two different calculations.
Got it. Okay. I
Okay,
get
and
that. That was
it's-
English.
it's-
Thank you.
It's a big question among the community, and it's a very good question, especially with the reassessment. You know, I've seen a lot of crap, but I would call it crap because of the people pushing it around town, saying that, you know, Irvington has gone up 18% vis-a-vis Greenberg, and that means that Irvington's revenue is gonna go up 18%.
Right.
It's not true. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how this works. You know, the takeaway is that the tax cap legislation affects how much we as a district
Can collect.
can levy onto the taxpayers. And then that's applied to the tax base.
Got it. Okay. I understand that for the moment.
By 1.25%.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
other people's assessed value has gone down and it's got to compensate.
But not because of the assessment. That's the reassessment. That's because
No,
of the business.
That's another year from now, we'll deal with
Exactly.
that headache.
Okay.
It's not really that other people's has gone down, we don't often think about our district as having a lot of commercial businesses along, 119 and along Broadway. And, we've paid a lot of tax certs back to those companies. So that's why last year the assessed value of the Irvington School District was 73 million. This year it's less because of those tax certs. Next year, with the new reassessments, it may be a different number. We don't know what that will be. But magically, we're spending 37,000 less, plus $300.
Right.
But we still, because of that lower value, it becomes a 1.25% tax increase.
Got it.
Allison, if you turn to page 11, while this, oh no, I wanted you back on 13.
You said 11.
No, I wanted her to look at
Just
11.
following directions.
All right, so look at page 11.
Yeah.
If the first number on the top, 50,927,000, see it's on the top line up there? The previous tax levy?
Yeah.
Now see here where it says the current allowable tax levy, 50,895,18?
Yes.
Which is our current tax cap, and we're going to raise, hopefully, 50,892,14, which is that $304 less
Got it.
than our cap. Does that kind of
Yes,
help?
it's just more of the burdens on the residential homeowner. It's basically, it's the same story we're hearing.
Although, I mean, some residential owners have also succeeded in reducing their assessment.
Right.
It's not like it's just commercial.
Got it.
And then there's the condos and rental buildings that have also reduced their value. So it's not just commercial, it's not just businesses. It's just that we don't pay tax certs to individual homeowners, but they do reduce.
But they
their
pay
assessment.
less of a percentage and then, okay.
Yeah, so it's not like it's all those.
Thank you very much for explaining that to me, sorry.
Now you
So-
can explain it to everyone else.
Well.
Yeah, it'll be a test.
Thanks for the pressure. Okay, just two quick questions. The budgetary considerations that you said we could potentially take out of our fund balance, is that something that you would decide later? Or is that something that would be decided before the budget is being voted on?
Part of this budget process.
Will be that, okay.
Because remember, we have a meeting on the 12th, and then we adopt on the 19th. So the 12th is really where we tend to make any last-minute changes such as this.
Got it. So that will all be included, because I think that's a good, if you decide to add some of these things in. So right now, we're using no fund balance?
No, you're using 500,000.
This is including the 500,000.
We've historically, in the last couple of years, been using 422. We used to use like 250 going back to 2010, I think, 11, around there.
Okay.
And then we
So-
upped it to 422 a couple of years ago.
My
and it's
first
been-
year.
Yeah, it's been that way for the last 3 or 4 years.
And this is 500, not including
Correct.
anything? Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the district has put together a really great FAQ if anyone is interested in understanding the fund balance better.
Robin Corner. Couple quick questions. Raina, when you mentioned with Project Lead the Way, and I know we have to offer the third section, but what do we do if we don't have enough enrollment for all 3 sections?
We haven't had that issue, so, I don't know.
We
I mean, we haven't had that issue of not having enough enrollment.
No, but that's historically why we ended up not offering all 3.
I don't know, I mean, I
Way
can't
back,
go
yeah.
back, yeah.
Okay, so you
I
don't know, okay. I guess a question on the strategic plan. Is there any number in this budget for the strategic plan?
A dollar amount for costs
Yeah,
related
a dollar
to that?
amount.
No, there would be
Did we
no
budget
new-
for
no
it,
new
or did we pay
costs
for it this year?
paid this year.
Okay. And then I guess the last thing is just in the 5th grade. I guess for the community and for me as a community member, will there be any other additional information since the budget includes adding language, which is a great thing, but will there be any other additional information before the vote in terms of how that will be rolled out? I mean, you guys talked about a couple of different ways to do exploratories.
I mean, we could certainly work to develop a proposal.
I think it would be helpful to have it fleshed out a little bit. Yep.
Yep.
Thank you. Anyone else? Nope, okay. So now we go back to board members, and again, no need to separate questions from comments. Let's just let it all hang out. Michael, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so thank you very much for putting together the presentation. It's fascinating to see that we can reduce our budget and yet the tax rate increases, so good luck explaining that to people.
That's your job.
I guess just since we have some new people, you know, we heard tonight that we've done a lot of work on professional development with, we had Common Core and implementing that in our schools. We've been doing work in world languages. You previewed that we're going to have to look at that for social studies, developing curriculum, and for next-gen science standards. And then one that I've mentioned in prior meetings has really been interesting and been a long-term and big initiative for the district is really rewriting curriculum from kindergarten through 12th grade and putting it into a system called Rubicon Atlas that allows teachers to work together in teams and for administrators to work to see where there are gaps, where there are redundancies. And I think you know, a lot of times when we hear concerns about why is this thing happening here in this grade or that grade, this is a process that will help us to address it more systematically. So $25,000 doesn't seem like a lot,
But if anything, my concern over the past few months has been that we need to expand our ability to move forward on professional development, on developing this curriculum and figuring out what we're able to do next with curriculum design. So you're saying that I know that we are kind of done with the phase of implementing Common Core, but are we really in good shape? Are we able to improve? I mean,
So I guess I would say two things. One is honestly, the most expensive commodity we have is really time. And so any delays in anything we do or the pace at which we are able to accomplish is just because there's just not enough time for teachers to get this work done. So it's not always money. Money does some things, but it's more complicated than just money. The second thing I would say is when we shifted from having Christine Rosner being our math coach, that was a significant savings. We were paying for a lot of support, especially for the development of math, because math was so new. So some of these other things, it's not that they won't cost some money to do the work of the next gen science standards or the social studies, but certainly nothing is as significant as the math has cost us. I also would say that not only was there the ongoing math curriculum development that cost money, because we were pulling teachers to do certain things. We did a lot of summer work for teachers to get that done. So it's not that they're separate. I don't want to imply that the curriculum mapping is separate from some of the Common Core initiatives, but there are some pieces that were costing us some money that I feel like at this point, that's not the need. The need is the time. So the $25,000, look, would it be better to have the $25,000? Well, maybe it would be. I don't know. But I also think in looking at where we can tighten our belts a little bit and think a little bit differently, it feels reasonable.
right. So, but time is money. How do we get more time? How do we move forward on these things?
Well, we're moving forward, but we're not miracle workers, so we're moving forward. But I'm saying that money is not going to make us move faster or slower. We're moving along as planned.
Do you, for example, with curriculum design, last year, the district was able to make a commitment that by the end of this year, it would have all the new curriculum input. Are we on track for that? And are we able to maybe, after this budget process, know or get some sort of commitments on where we'll be with these different?
Yeah, so I think I either talked about this at the last board meeting or the previous board meeting. In many ways, yes, there are exceptions. So if I'm a teacher and I have 4 different courses, will all 4 courses be mapped? No. I mean, it wouldn't be possible for a high school teacher to have mapped all 4 courses in this amount of time. So we're making sure that our core courses are mapped. So for instance, if I'm a high school social studies teacher and I'm teaching an AP US course and I'm teaching psychology, maybe my psych course will be mapped. Certainly our AP US course would be mapped. So we're looking at the core, and then over the course of next year, we'll be picking up anything that couldn't be mapped in the amount of time that we currently.
So we'll be continuing to map and not able to actually act on it yet?
No, not at all, as a matter of fact. Mapping is not something you do and then stop.
Right.
Mapping is something that actually should be living and breathing forever. And that's the message to teachers. We should be constantly going in. Those maps are not, they're unit designs. So I should always be looking at my units as the curriculum changes, I'm going in and I'm making changes. As I refine my practice, I'm going in and I'm making changes. The reason we want to make sure all the core is in is so that we can start to do the gap analysis, so that we can start to assess and look at our assessments, our student work. Where are we rigorous enough, and where do we find ourselves doing the same thing year after year versus bumping up the rigor? So that's all in the core curriculum.
Right.
And I don't mean the Common Core curriculum.
Right. We've been in this phase where we moved out of the 20th century, and every 5 years looking at textbooks. It's been kind of ad hoc in between, and now we're trying to get to an organized place. My question is, when do we get there?
We're there. As I said, at the end of this year, most of the core curriculum will be mapped. That hasn't changed, so I feel like we've been saying that. Again, I'm highlighting for you the exceptions. The exceptions would be if I'm a teacher and I have multiple courses I'm mapping. Mapping takes a long time. It's not something a teacher sits down and does in an hour. In order for a teacher to develop their curriculum using the Understanding by Design framework is hours and hours for each unit. So I guess I'm being thoughtful and careful, and that's why I'm saying we're mapping that core curriculum. We want to see where those gaps are. Some of our singleton courses, they're not as dependent on the course before or the course after. If I'm a kid in high school and I'm taking psych, it's not dependent on what did I take before. I'm not looking to align that. Are we looking to find some common threads along the way? Yes, but that I would say is higher level use of our maps. So I would say that we're on course as we've been saying.
Okay, I'm gonna move on.
Okay,
But, so it's, the $25,000 budget line isn't the issue is
Time.
management. I'm concerned about the deferred maintenance. I understand that we hired somebody last year, but in coming for many years before I joined the board this year, when we have to tighten the belt, it seems that buildings and grounds is the area where it gets the hit. I know that this year, this presentation, we're seeing that 106,000 is cut, or maybe I'm taking a large.
From our original proposal.
Yeah,
So-
but then also the prior presentation, we had another
Right.
several tens of $100,000 taken from.
Yeah.
Basically, we started with a push-ahead budget of buildings and grounds that added almost 200,000, and we've taken away more than 200,000?
But there were a lot of things in the original push-ahead budget that we discovered were actually not things that we would want to spend our money on. When we went through the Buildings and Grounds Committee, they were either redundant, because what happens is the requests come in from the principals, and in many cases, Gary just enters them into the spreadsheet without really giving it a thorough once-over. So that's what we saw the very first time around. So when we went through, as we promised we would, the Buildings and Grounds Committee, we went through and eliminated a lot of things that even Gary admitted were unnecessary. So I think it's comparing it to that original presentation is probably not the right standard.
Right, but it's still, at the end of the day, deferred maintenance that at some point we have to pay for, if not this year.
No, in some cases it was, he said in some cases he was saying, this is work I can do with my staff rather than paying for an outside contractor. That's why we saw some of those numbers go down from the very beginning.
All right.
But I think if your overall point is that in tight budget years such as this, do we tend to, out of necessity, not fund minor, I would call minor painting, things like that, B&G matters, so as not to reduce staff, cut programs over the last 6 years? Absolutely.
Right.
And then we
It's
play
just
catch
that
up
it's
from time to
additive.
time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I mean, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate.
Well, it speaks to the need to, when we have more budgetary room, rather than, that adding back maintenance should be one of our top priorities, rather than necessarily looking at adding positions.
Absolutely.
Last year, we were having this dialogue, we added positions, I think, more than added back maintenance items, and so, something to keep in mind.
Something to remember next year.
Right.
I guess that's my point, is it's something that we'll be looking at probably next
And
year.
there's often something that's more attractive that somebody wants to do, but you don't
Well,
want.
while we're at it, though, we could say that one of the ideas that seemed like a plausible idea is taking a little more money out of the fund balance in order to pay for the B&G, because the 500,000 is a hypothetical number, because you took it from 422 to 500, so we could take it from 422 to 540 to pay for $40,000 in additional buildings and grounds.
Keep in mind that you need to make it up the following year.
Right.
Well, that's the same thing with deferred maintenance. You have to, either way, you're gonna have to make, these are both things where you're running down an asset, be it your buildings.
Right.
Or your funds, and in order to get that asset back up to the value you want it to be, you're gonna have to spend the
I
money
didn't say it was a cost-free option,
Right,
I
it's-
simply.
It's, maybe it's nicer to have painted walls than money in the bank, probably is.
Maybe.
And then again, I just, as a point, I want to just reiterate my
Yep.
comment from before, that we think we're going to be able to accomplish a lot of that this year. So it's not like we're neglecting these things. They're things that are going to be accomplished. And a lot of the savings that we found from the last time, there were some items that we just thought weren't necessary, but then there were also some items that were of significant cost. $25,000, for example, for the window stops, Stephen, in the middle school to allow the windows to open wider. Well, we were originally thinking we were going to contract out, but no, we're going to have our very talented Matt do the work, and we're just going to have to buy the materials to do it for a couple $1,000. So it's going to take longer to get it done. I'm not going to get it done immediately over the summer, but Matt's going to work on it and get it done. So that's $25,000, which is a significant piece of that pie.
So he just got a new nickname, Talented Matt, but.
Yes.
There's also items that are all, usually in every buildings and grounds budget, there are items that are one-time only fees. And for example, in next year's budget, there's $26,000 budgeted to purchase and install a concrete slab and storage shed for the athletic department. That will not be there next year, so maybe that $26,000 then can be used towards painting, because you're not gonna be buying another shed. So it changes on a year-to-year basis.
And we're buying a pickup truck, new truck next year.
Yeah.
$40,000.
Right. And then beyond that, we have, you updated us last week, but maybe some of you don't know, is that the bond projects are moving forward. We'll be building several new fields and a number of other projects in our buildings this year. So when we look at the considerations, I don't know if we can go to that page, you know, I guess I have some concern that we're going to spend a lot of money on some new fields, and I'm not confident yet that we are prepared to take care of them. And I think that's why that was a consideration on the list, and one that I'm bringing attention back to again. Similarly, we had identified and had a committee that looked at modified sports and found that in a number of sports, students are being cut, and we were able to, I presented last meeting, an opportunity to, that we discovered with Artie McCormick and Dr. Harrison to expand volleyball in the fall, basketball in the winter for boys and girls. That would allow over the next number of years hundreds of students to participate in sports that they're being cut from now. So while it didn't make it on this list of considerations, I want to bring it back to our attention, and maybe if we're looking at considerations at our next meeting, that perhaps it could be on that list, or if we're looking at opportunities to put things back in, that's one that I present to the board.
Do we have a cost estimate on that?
We were, for volleyball, it's, each sport to run is around $6,500. For volleyball, we also need to buy some additional net equipment, which was another $8,000, something like that.
Total was like $16,000 or $17,000 for the two.
But then for basketball, it's a bit tougher because that involves fixing the very degraded floor for the gym in Dow's Lane. So that's about $40,000 plus the $6,500 to do the basketball. But that's both the boys and the girls team. Both are very popular sports. So I'll just leave that there, unless somebody else wants to.
Is there any scope to reallocating our existing budget in sports?
I guess what I wonder.
A higher priority?
Yeah, or what I wonder, are there lines in the budget that could still be explored? I know when we hired a bunch of teachers last year in the fall, we then have mentors that we assign to them, and there was a budget attached to that. What happens to a budget line like that? Is that money that is still sitting somewhere that could be given to?
We have mentors every year.
Even when we're not hiring? I mean, we're not really hiring this year.
We have a number of retirements this year.
Yeah.
I think rather than trying to brainstorm about how we're
I'm not
gonna shift the money-
brainstorming. The general question is, are there?
Let me finish.
areas-
I think what we just want to do is get it in front of the board, is
Yep.
this is something that we should be considering as another, that's all we need to do is this
Absolutely.
consideration. And the cost, again, I still didn't hear the exact cost that we're asking for. Is it?
I think
'cause we're not
for
asking the-
volleyball, we can put in the number, but it's somewhere around $12,000, and for basketball,
Right.
it would probably be around $47,000.
Right, so the basketball is probably not on the table here because of the cost.
Okay.
So we're talking about $12,000.
Yeah, or we could compare it against other buildings and grounds items in terms of the gym and see how it ranks.
Okay, so we just want to get it out there, and we can figure out later if the board supports that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, so we could talk about it. I'm just wondering about because this comes up, relative impact on boys and girls. Have you sounds like there's more girls' activities there than boys.
Well, volleyball
Especially
is,
if
volleyball's
basketball's
girls,
constrained.
basketball is boys and girls.
But basketball's a tougher thing.
John, you missed the presentation last week, so maybe you guys could talk about.
I'll send you the
Yeah.
presentation again, yeah. If we stay under the tax cap, people get a rebate check. I don't think we mentioned that in a prior meeting, so I just want to put that out there as, I guess, one
Those that were
motivation.
eligible for them the past 2 years will still be eligible next.
Okay. So that really covers it. I mean, my big concern in terms of the commentary is we have a number of we don't know where we'll be next year, but the expectation is that our cap will continue to be low, and that we have a number of negotiations in place. We're not increasing our basis by reducing our budget, so I'm just worried that we may stay under the cap this year, but require a larger ask next year. And that's a concern of mine as we look at this budget.
Okay. John?
Let me just, I wrote down a few questions. I think maybe they were answered already, but let me just flip and see. Then I'll give you my views. The reduction in teaching aides in special education, I didn't understand why we're able to do that.
Because of how we're allocating staff, we're not going to need as many bodies for next year. So in looking at situations associated with ICT classes, kids that have one-on-one aides, we're just not going to require as many bodies based upon how they're planning the assignments for next year.
Okay. And when we're talking about reducing professional development by 25,000, what are we actually spending less money on? Is it stipends, or is it summer work, or what are we actually?
It's across the board. It could be a variety of different things. So one of the things that we had spent some money on, I would say in these past couple of years, as I indicated, were consultants. So it's a combination of different pieces. The other thing that I would say that would contribute to the reduction is we're going into our third year of foundations. And so we had 2 very intense years of foundations rollout, lots of support for teachers. Going into our third year, while we'll still need some support in place for that, we won't need quite as much support.
The last 2 years, we were extending it to another grade, each of those 2 years.
Last year was K and 1, and this year we're in now, we extended it to second.
And that's the end of the extension?
Yeah, it doesn't go, we won't go beyond second grade.
Yeah, okay. A question on the FTE for language. I would be interested in if we were to take that .4 FTE and say we want to beef up instruction in language in either the middle or the high school, where would we be able to put that? Because, it's not like, it's one thing to say it's really advantageous to have that be a full-time position rather than .4, but it doesn't follow from that to me that we obviously want to put that .4 in Main Street School.
I guess, I don't know what beef up means really,
Reduce class sizes.
Reduce
or-
class sizes, add add another section here or there, so we can schedule more easily.
What you're saying is apply it to middle school.
Apply it to middle school or high school, or I don't know if we have we have a complete array of the different, the honors versus the non-honors, or that kind of thing in all the different grades. But, scheduling can be an issue, and class sizes would go down by the law of averages, but that's my thought.
I guess a couple of things I would say. One is, we could certainly go back and speak to the principals and ask them what they would see as, I wouldn't feel comfortable right off the top of my head providing an answer about that.
I'm not suggesting you would, yeah.
But the second piece I would say is that that would then require hiring a .4 person. So again, Well, because the reason that that works is because we have somebody who's .6 that would be rounded out to 1.0. So if we were gonna go and look for a .4 English teacher, we're gonna get,
No, I'm talking about
Instead of using that one, so instead of allocating that .4 towards.
oh, no, okay, I'm sorry, then no, right now, certainly the middle school doesn't need any additional sections. I mean, that we've looked into. The middle school does not need any additional sections of Spanish or French. The numbers are not,
Aren't the class sizes fairly large in the middle school?
Well,
I mean, I don't think we would say so, nor would, yeah.
I guess some, languages, especially if you're talking a lot of students speaking, could always benefit from being smaller.
Right.
I guess what I'd say, so we had they don't feel the need to increase their sections. Like, the class size doesn't seem to be too high. It doesn't seem to be impeding what kids are able to learn. So, yes, I can go back and we can certainly have that conversation, but we did have the conversation about increasing. Is there a need to increase the number of sections?
I'm not talking about a need, but would we benefit? I mean, there's a need, and then it might benefit us, even if it's, not,
So you can go back and check.
Sure.
and upgrading the product, anyway. Okay, probably no more questions on this. So I would, in terms of my views, I wasn't here last meeting. I would strongly support, just given where we are now, it was different when we had a different budget picture, but staying under the cap, not adding additional considerations if it means we're over the cap. I would be cautious. I would not really support, unless there's a really compelling reason, to using up more of the fund balance than we're already talking about, the 500,000. Not that they're, because I really think that we should do that when there's a really compelling reason to do it, because it's hard to claw that back, and it risks getting us in a hole, and maybe we should have a conversation, which we've never had as a board, about what the right level of the fund balance is, but until we do that, I don't think we should just deplete it just because it's convenient to do so. And that I made the comment about the, and I'm a little skeptical about approving money for Main Street language if we don't really know what they're going to do. I get that it's an exciting opportunity, but that's part of what's driving my question about can we use that personnel resource somewhere else, and something that might also benefit us. I think that's the main comment I would have, so, yeah.
Okay.
Leave it there.
Thank you, John. Bob?
I think, John, 90% of that UT vote from my very eloquent speech last week.
I actually didn't get around.
John, come on.
I think I just heard you.
Yeah, I know, maybe it was
From where was I? Minnesota, yeah.
No, I'll be brief. To recap, I don't think anything I've heard tonight changes what I said last week, which is because of the extraneous issues of the school district going on with reevaluation, I do not favor whatsoever going over the tax cap. Similar to John, as I said last week, I'm not in favor of dipping into the fund balance any further. To Michael's point about $12,000 for volleyball, sort of we always seem to come down every year to these sort of little items that are nice. In our budget, frankly, that's a rounding error. A budget's an estimate, right? So I think that something like that we can get done every year. We find ways to do those things, and if the board feels that way, that's fine. But I'm not in favor of further dipping into fund balance to accommodate these issues, especially since the administration tells us that with respect to the building and grounds issues, that a lot of those can be taken care of otherwise than dipping down. So stays the same as last week, but I do commend Chris, Bev, the remainder of the team, the administrative staff to doing what the board asked, which is getting us underneath the tax caps. I think it is, in a year like this, a challenge one.
Catherine?
So I may take a contrarian position here. I actually would support going over up above the fund balance for the one-time expense of the air conditioners, because I just go back to that night that I was in the middle school listening to the teachers, and it was hotter than hell. And it wasn't as if they could open the windows, because of course there's a safety issue with opening the windows. So windows only open a certain amount. So if I were to go anywhere on the fund balance, it would be on a one-time expense, and I certainly think the air conditioners are worth it. The only other item that gives me any sort of concern by not funding it is the grounds foreman, and this is because, again, we're putting an awful lot of investment into fields and things, you know, because of the bond, and for us not to then maintain them and keep them up, that one provides me with some anxiety. I don't know what the answer is there, because I wouldn't support the fund balance raid, because that's an ongoing expense. And I think you should only use fund balance for one-time sort of capital expenses. So those are the only two that I have some thoughts about.
Thank you. I had no further material questions. My only comment was using the fund balance for those very small buildings and grounds. It sounds like that's really not an issue, because it sounds like the buildings and grounds expenses that you eliminated from there can be easily covered this year. So I'm going to table my idea for that. So really at this point, it sounds like the material questions in front of us, just to sum up, are: do we find a way to add in $12,000 for modified volleyball, additional modified volleyball? And do we consider the air conditioners, using the fund balance for air conditioners? So does anybody else want a second, or we would really need a third for the air conditioners? I'm just looking for support on the air conditioners idea.
I definitely think it's a real issue.
It's a huge issue.
To use fund balance for air conditioners.
No, you're in favor of getting the air conditioners.
I'm definitely in favor of getting the air conditioners.
It's a cool idea.
It is a cool idea. I don't, and I think obviously 40 is, I don't know if there's another approach. Are there 10?
40 was the reduced number, so.
40 is the reduced number.
40 was the, asking the principals, if you had to pick the few classrooms that absolutely need some relief from the heat, which ones would you pick? And that was what they picked. So it's not that they went crazy.
But to be fair, and again, just because I have, and all of us have children throughout, the big issue has been housing.
Oh, I think middle school is.
Really?
Oh, my God.
I don't know, middle school's worse?
Because you can't open the windows.
Right.
They'll
the
open
windows you can
further
open
next
this
year,
far. They are
But
hellacious.
again, if you went with where, I understand that's what, and again, I'm not suggesting this, but maybe I am to get there, but.
And Main Street School.
And Main Street School, the top floor.
It's a brick building, it's just an oven.
My struggle is doing it in some places, it's going to be difficult to stop doing it. So I don't see it necessarily as a one-time expenditure.
Right.
Because I think there's going to be equity issues. So, so we're, and I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but I think you're doing it. I think it's a commitment that you keep doing.
How many classrooms do we have?
Good for that.
And is there any possibility of doing, this would be a room-by-room air conditioning?
Mm-hmm.
Is there
And
any
you got to think about the aesthetics of that too.
It's going to be god-awful, but is there any possibility of doing central air?
Oh, for millions of dollars.
That'll be the next bond.
Not in Main Street.
No, but seriously
Yeah.
though.
No, but
It's
I think
huge
it would take
expense.
something.
Because that would be a much better environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? You don't
Main
have,
Street, in middle school is possible theoretically, it just would be a massive upgrade, right?
Right,
Yeah.
That'd be a capital project.
Yeah.
and also, are these these are the cost of the air conditioning units themselves, which have,
And the electrical.
okay, but the air conditioning units themselves have to be replaced periodically, right?
Correct.
They're not, it's not just like this is a once-off expense. I don't know how long a unit like mine at home don't last for.
And maintain.
So I drop them
So,
off out of the windows.
so like take a lesson from our smart board history, right? You buy a ton of them at once, a ton start to fail at once.
Yeah.
So, 5 years from now, you're gonna be looking at buying 40, and then the next year another
Unless you buy
40.
some used ones.
All right, so, Michael, that's a second of the idea, because again, it's using fund balance to do this, because there really isn't any other way to accomplish it for that sum of money.
These types of questions,
This is why they pay us the big bucks.
they pay us the big bucks. And I did spend over, a little over an hour with a number of people who were very upset and understandably why in terms of the reassessment process just now. But that room was hot because it was full of people, and so I think each of them also understands how miserable it is to be in a hot room. I mean, it's not
And that
something
building's
that I
air
think.
conditioned.
What's
so-
that?
And that building's air conditioned. They
That
don't-
building, yeah. So it's something that we're asking students and staff to do that I just don't think in any business environment we would ask,
we
unless you're working
wouldn't
outdoors. I mean, so it's just, it's something that,
Well, except that we've been doing it this way for a long time. There was no air conditioning when I went to school here.
Well, there's global warming now.
That's
Yeah, I still think that this is something, understanding that I'm not gonna be on the board when this comes up next year, but if the board, and, going to Michael's sentiments about, us having to potentially go over the tax cap at some point, and I believe frankly that it may be next year. I think this is something you do then, honestly, as opposed to dipping into your fund balance. It bothers me even, I understand why we're doing it this year, we're dipping in 80 grand more. I think it's a reasonable number, it really is a drop in the bucket compared to our budget, but.
Well, and the fund balance
I'm-
itself is 2.2.
I get.
Another 100.
No, I get that,
It's
but
not much.
still, well, here's the thing. We went years ago from dipping into 200 or some a year. Then we came up with the idea that, 420, 422, whatever. it
422.
Is the right number, and that has worked for us in doing our budgets every year, and we've been able to maintain very small tax increases based upon that. I think that if you go down the road of thinking that that is an option, it's going to become more and more of an option every year, and that's what concerns me, frankly, as a taxpayer. I mean, there's very good fiscally prudent reasons to have that number there. The handful of days aside where the kids could use the air conditioning. Listen, it affects my kids too, I get it. I just don't like the idea of going into the fund balance.
Is this more important than the technology switch? Or less deferrable?
What we heard from Jesse last week was that we were at risk if it fails, and given its age, it's a possibility, and we don't have sufficient backups.
But could we take that chance for a year and?
We're taking that chance now. All of our equipment's at well beyond its useful life,
I'm
and we
just
have
the-
3.
Yeah, the point is if we, can we find something else in the budget to take out to pay for air conditionings? Or is everything in the budget, all 50-some million of it, more important than the air conditioning, so there's nothing else we can take out?
Right, so that's a hypothetical that we can't decide right now.
No, but
Because
I
what's
know,
in,
but-
what's in front of us is using fund balance for air conditioners, because we can say, we want you to try and find some other way to pay for air conditioners in the general budget, but that's gonna be difficult, and they may come back and say, no, we can't. But that's why it's easy for us to say right now, do we wanna use fund balance for air conditioning? And it sounds like we do not have 3 votes for that.
I'm happy, I don't want to use fund balance, but I'm happy with the administration. If there's more
Right.
magic to be worked, great. Nobody's going to argue against having the air conditioners if we could fit it in. I just don't want to dip into fund balance.
Yeah, I'm with Bob.
Right, so I agree too. So that tables the idea of using fund balance for air conditioners. It doesn't table the idea of never doing
Yeah.
air
I mean, I'm against baked children too, but we just
Right.
have to,
Right.
can't do it through fund balance.
Okay. So, and on the question of modified sports, it's $12,000. Does anybody want to support squeezing that into the budget?
I'm perfectly fine with
Just to be clear, the $12,000 is the cost of the coaching positions?
Yes.
Because the net volleyball net is a one-time
The
thing.
stanchion is a one-time thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
the
that's-
ongoing would be 6,500,
Yeah, $6,800, yeah.
and the travel and the
Right.
referees.
Officials,
Uh,
uniforms.
Yeah, I mean, didn't hear your presentation last week, but it generally sounds like a good idea. It also doesn't seem like a thing we have to really decide in the budget process, because it's such a small number.
Right.
Relative to our budget. Right.
Just wanted to see if there's support for it.
I mean, I think both Catherine and I mentioned also the
Grounds.
concern about the grounds,
Right.
Yeah, the grounds,
the fields specifically.
the 91,000.
Well, I guess the real question is, can we get firmer quotes before this gets put to rest, and then we can have,
I looked to Bev because we were going through the ones that we received that didn't meet standard. So it's
Right.
what folks turn around with, and
okay.
Well, we're not going to have an east field to do anything with for a few years anyway, right? So we're talking, we have Mazeros next year, I hope,
Right.
and
And Mazaris would be,
Dow's Lane
But it's-
Field,
much at all, yeah.
and then we have the Dow's Lane Field, so the need is going to be greater in a few years than it is now.
right.
Yeah, that's my opinion as well.
Well, I mean, you do have to successfully bring the Eastfield into playability.
Well, I think that's part of, I would assume that's part of what we floated
That's
the
part
bond
of the
for.
bond, yeah.
Is that,
I
but
think
those 3 seasons is the
not the
chair?
seasons of cutting and fertilizing and watering it. That's still an in-house
Well, that's
task.
different
Do
than a
that
foreman.
properly.
So that's what,
You're asking an existing
Person-
staff.
Outside contract.
Yeah, but I guess, yeah, and I don't want to argue both sides of this, but the thought there is that the idea of a foreman is going to oversee, it's going to have an expertise in it, it's going to oversee the watering, irrigation, the irrigation of it, spot repair, seeding and all that. And it's going to be a regular type project.
Yeah, and-
I don't want to ignore Eastfield yet, in that context of that conversation. I don't think it should be dismissed because of that.
And there was some sense that the turf would need ongoing maintenance, and we would benefit from having a foreman who kept that, in
It just,
sequence.
just instinctively, it seems like a lot of manpower, woman power for just the number of fields and grounds we have, just as a foreman. I know there's a lot of work to be done, but is there that much that we need to hire somebody to oversee all
Oh
that
my
work?
gosh, John, for as far as I said, we could use a half a dozen custodians, just to clean our buildings. So this, honestly, when we get down to this, we have custodians out there lining fields with our buildings and grounds guys and seeding fields. And if we have one of our current grounds guys out, we have a custodian riding the lawnmower for our sports.
and then there's something at the theater, so they have to go help with the
Yeah,
theater as well. and
but that's not, none of what you described is what a foreman would do, though.
No, but a foreman is going to be hands-on doing the actual work that we have other people doing
Maybe,
now, or
maybe,
supplementing it.
well, then I don't know.
And the other
Then we're
option was to
talking
get a
labor
vendor,
maybe than not a
vendor.
foreman.
John, in the sense that we need more bodies because of the fields, the foreman is one body that's going to be overseeing our existing custodial staff as they're working on the fields, right? Whereas if you hire an outside contractor, if you can find one that does meet our specifications, then you're actually hiring more bodies, right? Because that's people working on the fields.
I guess the question is, is it labor we need, or is it expertise we need?
The combination thereof.
Vendor with the team is offering both.
Yeah, but an individual we hire is probably, either it's, it makes a difference when we hire.
And I just want to say, when we look at a grounds foreman, it's a civil service title, so I don't want to think as we're hiring a boss. It's someone that's going to be hands-on doing work with expertise. So it's not just hiring a supervisor. But we will look to get additional quotes.
Right. I mean, the other thing is that hiring a ground foreman does mean going up in FTE, just to be clear.
Does mean.
It does, yes.
Yes.
And that's something that we've said.
And it's a 12-month position, I assume?
It would be, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I tend to think if we can find a vendor, that would be more promising.
Exactly. All right, so I think Do you have enough marching orders there?
I'm not sure. So I know we're definitely putting in volleyball. We're still looking for bids from a contractor. We have some questions for John's comments with respect to world language that we'll look into, but not changing the cost associated with the proposal.
Yeah.
Air conditioners, where I'm a little unsure, is that a closed deal?
Well, it's closed as far as,
Because-
it's fund balance.
But we'd
Right.
still like to explore it, if not fund balance.
Are there more carpets we can not replace and install?
Well, you've got a week, so, in this,
You got a week.
so, you know, the mission is to look into it. You can come back and say it can't be done. I mean, it's,
Gotcha.
right.
Good.
No is always an acceptable answer, as long as it's not said too often. All right, so, thank you. Any final comments from anybody? No? Okay, thank you for hanging in there with us. This is how the sausage is made. So we're moving on to our consent agenda.
Dinner would be nice, Phil. Let's move on to the consent agenda.
Someone say sausage?
Yeah. Smoked sausage. All right, so as always, we're going to move this so that we can talk about it. Any things that come to mind that people want to remove right away because they're going to vote no on it? Obviously, we're going to talk about these items. Nothing? Okay. So can I have a motion to move this to the floor? And this consists of 7173, 81, 91 through 94, and 101 through 106.
So moved.
Second.
Now, for discussion, anything that needs illuminating?
Just to thank.
Yes, the volleyball equipment, right, and the PTSA grants.
PTSA grants, yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you, PTSA, for the incubation, the chick hatching incubator.
Oh, wait, where's the chick hatching?
That's on page 8.
Chick hatching.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the volleyball equipment, thank you
For the chicks.
to,
It is, it's a great.
Great, yes.
who's that from?
Alpha Gamma.
Don't
Oh,
eliminate the chick
Alpha
hatching.
Gamma Volleyball, okay.
Chicks are important.
No comments?
Nope.
No? All right. All in favor of this consent agenda?
Aye.
Say aye. Aye?
Aye.
All right. Passes. And that brings us to any last community comments. Hearing none, we can move on from there to our next meeting, which is.
What about other board items?
Are there?
Yeah, I was gonna raise the issue of the Facebook comments.
Yes, I'm sorry, John. My
I
apologies.
think you even asked me to raise.
I
this
did,
issue.
I know, and I forgot. I'm sorry.
And the policy as it's been illuminated through, or the practice, I guess, since we never really considered it as a board, maybe it's not proper to call it a policy, is to remove all comments, every day, or
As they're posted.
as they're noticed and
So
posted?
I think John's saying if, with our Facebook page, it's been used essentially as a one-way communication tool. And if someone posts a comment, the comments are deleted from the page.
Is there any, okay, it might be worth our considering as a board whether we want to have some online forum for people to post their comments on what the district is doing, either on Facebook or some other method.
So I thought your first point was, earlier in the week, was we need to have a policy that just clearly explains so that people understand that when we're deleting their Facebook comment, it's because
Well, and that
this
could.
is our policy.
The question is that, well, I think it also, as with most policies, it raises the deeper question, is that the right policy for us to have?
Right.
And I don't think we should have this discussion now.
No.
But I think it's, I see Catherine's itching to have the discussion now.
Well, I just cautioned going down a path where we would eventually have to hire somebody to monitor it, or it'd have to become somebody's
You do have to have a
part-time job.
moderation if you're
You
having it totally free and
absolutely do.
open. And it's not about even our community members, it's people from, it's people from around the world who may discover the page and post foul language or offensive pictures.
Try to sell you Ray-Ban sunglasses.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It becomes a
Right, or
nightmare.
if you send them $8,000, they'll get their money out of Nigeria for you.
Right, that kind of stuff.
It's much cleaner to have a policy of taking everything down, because if people want to post comments, they can do it on their own
Yeah,
Facebook page.
and I don't know if anybody, I'm sorry, went out to get some water, but if anybody raises, I don't, and again, I haven't done any research on this, but my gut is, strong gut, is
Some of them are.
to say that this is a public, that a Facebook page is a public forum where people should have First Amendment rights.
Nobody's saying, well.
Well, I think the.
There was
comment
the
came from
concern,
there.
there was a concern by somebody who posted something of a political nature and was concerned that he was being censored, and the answer to that is no, he wasn't being censored.
That everybody
There are
says.
simply no, and that's the answer to that question.
But thank you for coming to the Facebook page, because every day you can find a new story about the Irvington schools and their students. So,
Yeah, I find Facebook pages a difficult way to get information personally, but it's works
It's
for
also
some
shared
people.
on the website.
Yeah, and that I have.
So can we suggest then that the policy committee just take this up?
Um, Well,
So what we'd be taking up.
Just to
A
explain that
policy
this
that
is,
we just post that it's on the Facebook page,
this
that
is our,
everything's
it's
taken
just
down.
essentially
That it's a policy. of the school
codifying
district.
our
I
social
don't know if
media.
it need, maybe we can talk to council to say.
we don't necessarily, well,
Well, it's a policy, not a law, so.
Yeah, but who writes policies? Lawyers, so. Yeah, so we'll explore it further.
yeah,
and come back to the
we
board.
can have a discussion about, at a more structured time, but whether we even want a policy.
I think a part of it
I'm
is,
not so sure we want a policy on this.
I don't know if we want a policy other than some kind of disclosure statement somewhere.
Maybe the Facebook page
Right,
itself
yeah,
should
on the
have.
Facebook
But I just
page.
don't know where to include it is the issue right now.
Why can't we
But-
just post it on the page?
And the about page.
But I do think,
It's like how
Right,
much
or
time?
a legal
Well,
disclosure.
we'll explore it. We'll
I
explore
still
it. Let's
think
not
it would be
solve
nice if maybe it's only district residents or district parents had some way to provide their thoughts and feedback somewhere.
I don't think they have any problem providing us
No,
with
they-
feedback or
They,
thoughts.
Well, they do, because they can send us an email. I mean, that's, you know.
yeah, but,
They do.
but, well,
I don't know if there's a way of restricting the Facebook page to those groups.
Well,
no,
anybody
probably
who
not.
uses it
Wouldn't
can
be
share.
Facebook. It doesn't have to be
posts.
Facebook, right?
Right.
Actually, yes, Michael, exactly.
What?
They can share
Anybody
it.
who wants to make a comment can share the post to their own page and comment to their heart's delight.
And they do.
Exactly,
Yeah, well, okay, yeah.
exactly.
But I can move on now?
Yeah.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
So-
I've done my duty and raised the topic.
Thank you.
Well done.
So I need to have a motion to,
Your next meeting, did you say that?
our next meeting is April 12th. Thank you, Chris. It's next week at 7:30 right here. And then now it's time for our executive session, where we will be discussing pending litigation with our counsel that's been patiently sitting here. So that means we're going to have a motion to adjourn to that
Second.
executive session. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Bob, and then Catherine. And those of you
Who are not council.
Thank you.
who are not counsel must
Must
leave the
leave.
building.
Scott and Gail are staying because they're.
Very nice to
associated.
have you, Clinton, in our meeting.
Stephen, thank you.